My fate was decided in the Empire's selection. Praise His Imperial Majesty. It was the day I completed the second selection test. The orphanage director chuckled and patted my shoulder, his bloated, greasy fingers betraying how well he'd stuffed himself over the years. You're going to be the masterpiece of our orphanage, Luca. Despite being a greedy pig, the director had an eye for talent. 3 years later, when I turned 15 and became a cadet of the Imperial Guard, his words proved true. The day I left the slums of the lower sector, I underwent a baptism of steel. Imperial scientists severed my limbs, replacing them with cybernetic prosthetics, a luxury of artificial arms and legs that most lower-class citizens would never even lay eyes on. I could shatter boulders or bend steel with my bare hands, and leap over two-story buildings with a single bound. The Irregular of Orphanage 72. People called me that. It was rare for anyone from the double-digit orphanages to reach the level of the Imperial Guard. The majority of Imperial Guard cadets hails from single-digit orphanages, or is the offspring of nobles. Still, there was no class-based discrimination in selecting cadets for the Guard. It was simply a matter of capability. Those with better genes, raised in superior environments, naturally exhibited superior abilities. That was the norm. Occasionally, someone like me, an irregular, would defy that difference. But in the greater picture, the existence of irregulars like me was insignificant. Upper officials might call you an irregular, but do you know how they truly call people like you? The commander of the Imperial Guard looked down at me during the interview, then continued without waiting for my response. They call you a genius, someone who defies natural limitations and adverse conditions, creating outcomes that fall outside the norm. I didn't smile at the praise. I am merely a loyal servant of the Empire and His Majesty, I replied, placing my hand over my heart. A model answer, Luca. The edges of the commander's eyes glowed with an icy blue light. His name was Gemellus Custoria, one of the Empire's strongest soldiers. Thank you, Commander. A sudden shyness came over me. It was hard to meet the commander of the Imperial Guard's eyes. It's fine to be exceptional, but don't be different. If you want to live a long life, that is. With that piece of advice, the interview came to an end. I was required to live at the Imperial Guard Training Center for 4 years. The first year of cadet life passed in a blur of relentless training, so intense that I barely noticed the days slipping by. Each morning, I'd open my eyes in the barracks bed and begin training every night. I'd close my eyes with an exhausted body, only to find it was already morning again. An Imperial Guard had to master every combat skill of the Empire, and be proficient with all military equipment, swordsmanship, spear technique, marksmanship. These were basic. We trained to become experts in operating every kind of heavy weapon and equipment. Every quarter, they tested our nervous system compatibility and limits, replacing my prosthetic arms and legs with higher-grade versions. It was a gradual process to increase energy output, allowing the nervous system to adapt to high-performance cybernetic limbs. Through this series of adaptations, we would eventually earn the right to operate the Legion, the exclusive combat armor of the Imperial Guard. Today is an important day for all of you, a sort of midterm assessment. On the final day of our first year of training, the commander gathered the cadets in an underground coliseum, a space modeled after ancient Earth ruins. 40 cadets, including myself, stood motionless, waiting for the commander to speak. His Majesty the Emperor, he began, pointing toward the opaque glass on the upper level. He informed us that the current Emperor, Yuri Akrisha, and his family were present behind it. Some of the cadets murmured quietly, as if in prayer, to praise Dino Akrisha, the founder of the Empire, the first Emperor, the father of the nation, the guardian of humanity. Although the Empire's founder had been dead for centuries, he was still venerated. Under their watchful eyes, you will display your abilities. On the other side of the Colosseum stood a group of condemned prisoners. We would be fighting against these armed death row convicts. You may choose any weapon you like, said the commander, gesturing to a wall where various weapons were displayed. There were swords, spears, and several firearms. Only one among us opted for a firearm. I cast a quick glance at the odd one who picked a gun, then shifted my gaze. Zing! I drew a sword. The blade was smooth, coated with a monomolecular layer capable of slicing through steel. Though an Imperial Guard had to be proficient in all weapons, melee weapons, especially swords and spears, were held in the highest regard. Melee weapons were impractical in battle unless wielded by a highly skilled fighter. For regular soldiers, firearms were more efficient. For this reason, the Imperial Guard specialized in melee weapons. priding themselves on being able to defeat enemies armed with firearms, using just swords and spears. Creak. 5 armed convicts stepped onto the coarse sand arena from the opposite side. Soon, each cadet took their turn, stepping forward to face the condemned inmates. I watched every duel in the arena, waiting for my turn. No cadet had died, but even when they succeeded in executing their opponents, some ended up with severe injuries. A lack of skill was often to blame. Before long, my turn approached. I noticed the cadet going before me, the one who had chosen a gun. "So, you're planning to use a gun? If you're confident, that's fine," the commander remarked, looking at the unusual cadet with the firearm. After a year of training together, I knew this gun-wielding cadet's abilities. Though he'd chosen a gun, he wasn't a coward, he was exceptionally skilled. The gun-wielding cadet entered the arena. Bang! The gunshot echoed. If he'd chosen a gun, there had to be a reason. With near supernatural skill, he moved fluidly, like he was dancing, firing his shots. Clang! Without looking, he fired, intercepting a bullet fired by one of the convicts. It wasn't luck but calculated precision, a technique that allowed him to deflect bullets with bullets. As expected, as one would expect from House Karthika. Cadets murmured in admiration for the gun wielder. Before long, he was face to face with the convicts. The prisoners, now demoralized, were pulling their triggers in vain. Their magazines had long since emptied. Impressive. He had demonstrated the gap in skill, subduing the condemned with ease. Bang! He pressed his gun directly to the convict's forehead and fired. It was practically close-range execution, not unlike using a bayonet. If anything, it was a more challenging approach. Clap, clap, clap. Applause rang out from beyond the opaque glass. Bowing his head and bending at the waist, the gun-wielding cadet made a lasting impression on the Emperor. If you were going to use a gun, that level of skill was required. His performance left no room for doubt about his abilities. "Unfortunate, Luca. Comparisons are bound to be made," the commander said, smirking. A surge of defiance roared within me. Though I hated to admit it, my temper was far from mild. "We'll see who's really unlucky," I replied, realizing I may have overstepped. I glanced at the commander, but he only shrugged, laughing. Click. As I entered the arena, the door closed, sealing off any path of escape. Either all the condemned would die, or I would. There were only 2 possible outcomes. Zing! I raised my sword to my face. The hum of the blade was unsettlingly sharp. Bullets are manageable. I can deflect or dodge them. This was a basic competency for an Imperial Guard. But for us cadets, it was far from guaranteed. A comrade who was injured in this test served as proof. What I needed in that moment was superhuman focus. Through special drug administration and multiple surgical procedures, our nervous systems had been chemically enhanced. There were minor side effects, but it allowed us to achieve an artificial state of heightened concentration, maintaining an accelerated thought process akin to the moments before death. In simulation training, I managed to deflect bullets several times in succession. My abilities are sufficient, but being able to do it 9 times out of 10 wasn't enough. In reality, a single failure could mean death. Only a perfect success rate would make this skill dependable in live combat. Huff, huff. The 5 convicts emerged into the arena, breathing heavily. They looked terrified, warily eyeing the young cadet before them. It was the pressure of facing a member of the Imperial Guard. Even if I was only a cadet, they were demoralized by the name of the guard. Click, click. The convicts watched me, firearms in hand. For a moment, we were locked in a standoff, neither side moving. I examined them closely. Their bodies were patched together with cheap cybernetic augmentations, the functionality of which was questionable. Their limbs were illegally modified and asymmetrical, leaving some of them lopsided and unbalanced. They barely met the most basic standards. If they were unarmed, I could kill them all with my eyes closed. But they were holding guns. A lucky bullet to my head or a vital area, and I'd be dead. Complacency would be fatal. Swish! I steadied my stance, focusing forward. As I assessed the battlefield, my mind shifted into the combat-focused thought acceleration that had been deeply ingrained. Through training, the pattern of crossfire from the 5 convicts formed several possible scenarios in my head. Overlaying these fire patterns revealed a safe path, a route I could exploit. Of course, it was only a prediction. If I advanced and got hit, I would pay the price for my lack of skill. For now, I just have to trust my instincts and move forward. In a split second, my decision was made. I kicked the ground, and as if on cue, gunfire erupted. With my high-performance prosthetic legs, I could sprint faster than a vehicle over short distances. Bang! I ducked. A bullet grazed past, close enough to brush my hair. It felt chillingly close. Death was closing in on me, but the thrill of success outweighed any fear. In that moment, I must have been smiling. Bang! More gunfire erupted. I twisted my body and sharply changed direction. The abrupt stop put strain on my left ankle, causing a creak. I could hear the sound of a few components shifting out of place. For now I have no time for minor issues. I only needed to keep moving for 10 more seconds. Blood. Sliding to shift my momentum, I pushed off the ground with my fingertips and sprang forward, hardly losing any speed. I closed in on the convict furthest to the right. From here on, he was within sword's reach. My domain. My arm moved, and the blade traced its path. Slice. The convict didn't even have time to scream. His head slipped off in a clean cut, his mouth opening and closing like a gasping fish. Good, one down. My hormonal system was attuned to combat, so the guilt of killing was faint, dissipating as quickly as it came. I scanned my surroundings, using the body of the convict I'd just killed as a shield would make it easy to take out the remaining enemies. But this is a place to display my skill. Surviving wasn't the goal I needed to catch the Emperor's eye. I recalled the sight of the cadet performing tricks with his gun. Could I pull off something similar? I'd never attempted it before, but right now it felt possible. My senses sharpened to an extreme, as if the fog had lifted. My expanded awareness rendered my surroundings in 3 dimensions. Like a radar map, I could predict each enemy's position and movements even with my eyes closed. The paths of their gunfire appeared to me as countless lines. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. I angled my sword forward and tilted it just slightly. Ting! A bullet struck the blade and deflected to the side. Og! A scream echoed as the deflected bullet pierced another convict's eye. The screaming convict collapsed to the ground shortly after. I did it. But there was no time to celebrate. A barrage of gunfire followed immediately. Ting! Tying! I tilted my blade repeatedly, deflecting bullets one after another. Each deflected bullet twisted in trajectory, embedding itself into the bodies of the convicts. Whoosh! My arm moved so fast it seemed to leave after images. Sparks flickered from my overloaded elbow joint, and my unsteady eyes felt as if they were scraping dryly. A faint smile crept across my face. I had surpassed my limits. My value was rising, but this neural fatigue is severe. My focus was running dry, and I felt my field of vision narrowing. After today's battle, I would need a full day or 2 of sleep to recover. Huff! Only the sound of my rough breathing filled the silent arena. I was the only one left standing. The convicts lay scattered around me, each with bullet holes in their heads. I was on the verge of collapse, but I forced myself to suppress the fatigue. Clap, clap, clap. Applause was heard from above, and I bowed in formal acknowledgement toward the unseen Emperor. Creak! The door opened, and I returned to where the guard captain and my fellow cadets were waiting. Ballistic trajectory control techniques aren't in the cadet curriculum yet, are they? The commander remarked, looking at me. Until now, I hadn't known this technique even had a name. I just copied what the previous cadet did. I replied honestly. There was no reason to hide it, and besides, I was eager to finish speaking and rest. I felt as though I could collapse at any moment. That wasn't an exaggeration. Ile Karthika is from a renowned household. He was already taught the curriculum in advance. It's different from an orphanage kid like you using ballistic control. I wasn't sure how to respond. Excessive modesty wouldn't look good, but neither would arrogance. This was one of those times when diplomacy was required diplomacy. One of my weakest skills. Before I could finish, the commander patted me on the shoulder. I'm not interrogating you, it's praise. Now go and get some rest. And don't forget to get your prosthetics repaired. Under the stare of the other cadets, I limped out into the hallway. By now, my gait had turned into a hobble. It looked like my left prosthetic leg was completely wrecked. Creak, creak. A rough-looking android detached my damaged prosthetics and started maintenance on them. As it replaced a few twisted parts, the red error indicator on the maintenance screen switched to green. I will connect the nervous system, Luca. Got it. With my response, the android attached the connection point between the biological tissue and the machinery. Clack. A dull pain spread. It felt as if dozens of needles were piercing my thigh simultaneously. If there is any issue. No, go on. I folded and stretched the once broken leg as I spoke. The android stood up and walked away in a stiff manner. The room was silent. I closed my eyes and began to meditate, dulling my senses just enough to let my strained nervous system rest. It was all something I'd learned at the Imperial Guard Training Academy. I enjoyed my time alone. For me, even this felt like a privilege. At the orphanage, I never had any time to myself with a dozen or so kids sharing a single room. At that moment, the days at the orphanage felt like a distant memory. In the Imperial Guard, even cadets had their own rooms, a remarkably luxurious accommodation. Moreover, as graduates from the Guard were essentially elite officers, a promising future awaited them. It's practically a guaranteed path to success. The Imperial Guard was a unit directly under the Emperor's command, a prestigious position that any citizen of the Akrisha Empire would die for. When the opportunity arrived, I couldn't afford to let it slip away. I was more desperate than my peers. Unlike them, who were of noble birth, I, born from the lower class, had no other path but to become a cadet in the Guard. Lost in thought, I furrowed my brows slightly and opened my eyes. I'd heard footsteps coming from the corridor outside the door. Knock, knock. Even the knock sounded neat. After a single breath's pause, a voice followed. I am Ile Karthika. Luca, I wish to speak with you. Ile Karthika. I knew him well. The gun-wielding cadet who had fought the death row inmates before me. That was Ile. I had a feeling I knew why he was here. Truthfully, I'd been aware of him throughout the training as well. Come in. I greeted Ile, sitting in a formal posture. The door opened, and Ile entered my room. Ile Karthika, a boy from a renowned household. His brilliant blonde hair and bright blue eyes gave him an aristocratic appearance. Even without mentioning his name or background, people would view him as a noble young man. Even the plain gray cadet uniform suited him elegantly. May I sit down? Ile looked at the chair by the window and spoke. The sun had long set, leaving the outside world shrouded in darkness and dampness. I don't intend to keep my guest standing. Sit down. I watched you today as you fought the death row inmate. Quite impressive. Ile raised his chin slightly as he spoke. His pupils, already replaced with cybernetic eyes, occasionally glowed faintly at the edges. If you came here wanting to exchange flattering words and foster some kind of friendship, you've come to the wrong person, young master. Logically, there was no need to speak so aggressively. But, perhaps because my nervous system was worn out, it was hard to hold back my irritation. It was as if I hadn't slept in days. I was in a rather sensitive state. Well, that was just an excuse. I knew there was a deeper reason behind my sharp attitude. The root cause was my jealousy. Coming from the orphanage, a place for those of us without even a two-digit status, I couldn't exactly welcome a noble boy of my own age with open arms. Unlike me, limited to prosthetic limbs, Ile's body was enhanced with cybernetic organs and various implants. Ile simply shrugged and pulled a pill from his pocket. If you take this, it'll temporarily reduce your nervous system's sensitivity. It'll help you rest more efficiently. Ile placed the pill in his mouth and swallowed it first, as if to show that he fully understood my condition. That only made me like him even less. I don't need it. With that level of fatigue, it'll affect your training tomorrow. You know as well as I do that this isn't something you can just push through with sheer willpower. You're exceptional, after all. I closed my eyes and sighed. Ile was right. I was well aware of my current condition. I was being swayed by inefficient emotions. Swish. I reached out and took the pill. It was a type of sensory suppressor. Gulp. The effect kicked in almost immediately. It was nothing like knockoffs made in the streets. Even as my senses dulled, it didn't feel unpleasant. It was a soothing sensation, akin to the warm ease just before drifting off to sleep. The irritation that had been hard to endure settled to a manageable level. I felt like I could even manage a compliment I didn't mean. Your skills weren't half bad either, Ile. I just did what I saw you do. Ile was a marksman who could hit a bullet with another bullet. Had I not witnessed it up close, I wouldn't have even considered deflecting bullets with my blade. It's more impressive to pull off something you've never learned on the spot. As you can see, I have a mechanical eye for combat, so it's not hard to calculate trajectory. But you pulled off with just your instinct. Ile tapped his eye with his finger. His words didn't seem insincere. It felt like he was genuinely complimenting me. Suddenly, I felt petty. And who really dislikes compliments? I was no exception. I kept my expression carefully neutral. Double quotes. So, what brings you here? I heard you're an irregular from an orphanage. I wanted to hear about that. I've never been to the lower sector. It was a comment that could have come off as offensive. The well-off young master is curious about life at the bottom, apparently, but his tone was careful and polite. Above all, I sensed genuine curiosity. There's nothing much to tell. The streets are filthy, and the people are rough, more than rough, really. They're brutal. Junkies with busted limbs drag themselves through the back alleys, collapsed from whatever drugs they're on, even knowing it's dangerous. Starving kids sneak out of the orphanage at night to scour the garbage heaps. Hold on. The orphanage is supplied with resources according to its head count. At Ilay's comment, I let out a dry laugh. And you think all that makes it down to us? The orphanage is supposed to raise talent for the Empire. That kind of embezzlement shouldn't be allowed. Or is that too naive of me? Ilay gave a bitter smile. I didn't bother to deny it. Embezzlement or not, it doesn't matter to me anymore. I'm going to be part of the Imperial Guard. At some point, my rationality had pushed aside the negative feelings. Thinking about it, I had no reason to be envious of the noble young master. At this moment, Ilay and I stood as equals. Someday, we'd be fighting side by side. Only a fool would maintain bad relations with an ally. If you have questions, go ahead. If I know the answer, I'll tell you. There was a note of ease in my tone. Ilay gave a faint smile and rested his chin in his hand. Then, have you ever been outside the Empire? I narrowed my eyes slightly. His question was odd. It was hard to read his intent. I was born and raised in the capital, Akbaran. I replied calmly. Ilay continued to smile as he stood up. So was I. With that, Ilay left my room. The commander of the Imperial Guard often made an appearance at the cadets' training and educational sites, usually on days when the exercises were either dangerous or particularly significant. Today, it was both dangerous and important. Clank. A cold sensation clamped around my wrist. My limbs were bound in restraints, allowing just enough movement to wiggle my fingers and toes. Turning my head, I saw other cadets in the same state. Their faces showed clear signs of tension. My own expression was probably not much different. Pain tolerance training. Among the various curriculums, this was notorious as the most horrific. In essence, it was training to endure torture. I looked through the glass at the people on the other side. Retired Imperial Guards serving as instructors stood there with indifferent expressions. Behind them, scientists and technicians moved about. The commander of the Imperial Guard stood with his arms crossed, watching us. His gaze lingered on me briefly before shifting to another cadet. Crackle. An electric current jumped from the electrodes attached to my head and limbs. My body instinctively tensed up. It's just a fake signal. It's not real. I repeated that to myself. But the sensations in my brain were no different from the real thing. Blood. A piercing sound filled the room from the speaker overhead. It wasn't as if anyone had actually stabbed me. A stab wound to the abdomen. I looked down at my stomach. My abdominal muscles were spasming. Even though no one had touched me, my skin was reddening as if bruised. Bang! The sharp crack of gunfire scrambled my mind. My shoulder throbbed as though I'd been shot there. Slice slash. A slash signal crossed over my arm, as if a blade had carved through it. The discord between reality and the signals left my brain reeling. It sounded like a joke, but it was real. It hurt a terrible, filthy kind of pain. Don't let your brain fool you, fool your brain. The commander's low voice resonated through the room. None of the cadets were truly listening, though. Everyone was grimacing, barely enduring the relentless pain. Some had lost control over their bodily functions entirely. Don't let your brain fool you, fool your brain. I forced myself to repeat the words. Whoosh. This time, it was a burn. The room felt as if it was heating up, the sound of flames rushing all around. My hands and feet trembled, and I felt every pore of my body opening in response. Training or not, I felt like I was going to die. I twisted my body, trying to break free from the restraints. It wasn't a particularly dignified sight. Help, help me. Pull please, arg. Thankfully, it wasn't my voice. The cadet next to me was screaming. I hadn't pissed myself yet, and the groans escaping my throat were still manageable. I'd say I was holding up pretty well, all things considered. Remember why you're enduring this pain. The commander of the Imperial Guard's voice sounded distant, as though it were coming from far away. The reason I was enduring this pain, the reason for this grueling training, advancement. Sure, that was part of it. But, for the Empire and His Majesty, the Emperor, someone let out a desperate shout. That's right. I knew it well. The protector of humanity, the heart of the Empire, our Emperor. For His Majesty, the Emperor, the cadet next to me mumbled. I parted my lips slightly, wondering if even whispering those words might ease the pain. But what? Vroom. The next stage began. My breathing grew faster. It was difficult to breathe. The sound of water sloshing grew louder until even my ears felt submerged and muffled. Drowning. Just a false signal, and yet it felt so real. Damn it. Damn scientists. With all their intellect, they'd created a device for this kind of torment. Don't let your brain fool you. My mouth was filled with blood. I must have been chewing on my lips and cheeks with abandon. Single quotes. Fool your brain. Damn it, what's that even supposed to mean? I tried to open my mouth to scream, but my lungs held no air. It felt as though they'd shriveled up. Breathe. It's not real. It's fake. It's not real. I wanted to bash my skull and pummel my brain into pulp. This stupid gray matter couldn't even discern reality from deception. What an utter fool. When would this cursed torture end? They call this training. Are they joking? BZZZZT. I heard the electrical signal powering down. The pain that had coiled around my body began to fade. Ha ha. I gasped for air. I had no strength to lift my head, let alone open my eyes. Even with the signals gone, the after effects of the pain that had torn through my nervous system and brain lingered. Step. Footsteps stopped right in front of me. I opened my eyes faintly. Luca, was it bearable? It was the voice of the commander of the Imperial Guard. He was standing in front of me. I wanted to spit out a stream of curses, but I held back with the last ounce of my patience. Since it's fake, it's bearable. Yes, it's fake. The commander extended one of his hands toward my face. I frowned in confusion. What the hell is he? The commander was smiling coldly. His rough hand were approaching my right eye. But this time, it's real. The moment he finished speaking, half of my world went dark. Pop! The commander had extracted my right eyeball. My eye was no synthetic implant. It was my real eye, connected to the optic nerve. Squish! He pressed my eyeball between his thumb and forefinger until it burst. Fear, bewilderment, and confusion. The colors of my emotions shifted rapidly within me. The pain was trivial. There was only an empty sense of physical loss. It was a pain I could tolerate, nothing compared to pain tolerance training. Instead, a cold clarity seeped into my mind. Damn it, the training worked. I couldn't deny it. Even having lost an eye, I didn't lose my composure. It was just an eye they'd remove someday anyway. My body would eventually be replaced with a full prosthetic. While you're at it, I would like to request an eye that has the feature to predict trajectories. The commander's eyes widened, and he laughed. Apparently, he was pleased with my response. Blood tears streamed down from the empty socket of my right eye. I lifted my head and looked around with my partial vision. Now I understood why the commander had come to me. Everyone else had passed out. Damn, did you endure the whole thing to the end? You should have just fainted gracefully when you needed to. You really have a stubborn side to you. It was the day after the pain tolerance training had ended. Ile Karthika, who came to see me, spoke in a way that made it hard to tell if he was praising or mocking me. Probably a bit of both. I managed to hold out. I answered shortly as I drank some water. My mouth burned, my throat felt raw, and my fingertips trembled sporadically. I lost my balance without realizing it whenever I walked. The after effects of the pain tolerance training lingered heavily in my body. I would need several days of treatment and rest to fully recover. Haha, that eye patch suits you. For a moment, I thought a space pirate had shown up. Ile said, looking at my face. Once my nervous system recovers, I'm scheduled to get a mechanical eye implanted. It's a better model than yours. Ile frequently visited me during my recovery. With a light smile, he spoke in a relaxed, gentle tone. He gave the impression of someone who would be a better fit as an administrative official than in the Imperial Guard. Still, his incredible skill was undeniable. The difference in ability among the cadets was becoming distinctly noticeable. Ile and I were the most outstanding. This wasn't arrogance, it was a fact. In most training exercises, the two of us would alternate between first and second place, or compete for the top ranks. In terms of overall scores, Ile was likely just slightly ahead of me. During the rest period, I felt restless. I wanted to return to training as soon as possible. As soon as I had somewhat recovered, I hastened to get the mechanical eye implanted. The doctor suggested removing and replacing my remaining eye as well, but I refused. The surgery is being paid for out of the commander's pocket. I had overheard this. The removal of my eye had been an impulsive act by the commander. For that reason, I'd heard he was personally covering the cost of my surgery. Well, with the commander, he probably has money to burn anyway. Comes from an impressive family too. Even so, I didn't like the feeling of incurring unnecessary debt. It wasn't done with malice. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who felt that way about the commander's actions. It seems like the commander has quite an interest in you. You've caught his eye. That's what Ile said, too. I could sense the commander's attention on me. For that reason, losing one eye didn't bother me. In the end, I received a better eye sooner than I would have otherwise. My biological eye was something I would have discarded eventually. Bzzzzzzzzzzz. For 2 days, I couldn't sleep properly because of the high-pitched sound from my right mechanical eye. By the 3rd day, the sound had stopped. My brain and nervous system finally adjusted to the new implant. You mastered it much faster than expected. Is that what makes you a talent of the Imperial Guard? The doctor gave a small chuckle as he spoke. He brought a precision scanner to my right eye, observing the intricate movement of my pupil. Once the examination was complete, I looked into the mirror. Bzzzzzzzzz. As soon as I focused on it, my right mechanical eye activated, its outline glowing brightly. A virtual interface appeared on the retinal display, projecting augmented information about my surroundings. Activate ballistic trajectory prediction. This was the most critical function. With no firearms nearby, there were no trajectory paths to display. Yet, the headache was severe as a massive amount of information flooded into my brain. My brain was expanding and restructuring its neural network to adapt to the newly added function. It would take quite some time to fully utilize this feature. Until the system adaptation is complete, take 1 pill a day before bed. The doctor, who had been watching me, handed over a pill bottle. It was filled with medication designed to aid neural cell formation and bonding. Thank you. Thank Hemelas, the commander, instead. I'm only doing this for the money. Hemelas hearing the commander's name felt strange. We usually called him by his rank, so I rarely heard his actual name. Thanking the man who gouged out my eye, as absurd as it sounded, I genuinely felt grateful. Anyone hearing this would think I was out of my mind. Our training was now entering the 3rd quarter of the 2nd year. So far, 2 out of 40 had dropped out, unless death intervened. Most Imperial Guard cadets completed the rigorous 4-year training program to become full-fledged members. Attrition was rare. However, low attrition didn't mean that training and education were easy. The Guard prided itself on being the harshest unit in the Empire, with cadets required to master the full spectrum of knowledge necessary for both combat troops and officers. Imperial Guards were elite soldiers, adaptable enough to become immediate combat assets in any situation or mission. Only cadets who pass the initial selection process are brought into the Guard's training program. Almost no one drops out halfway. The ones who couldn't endure probably paid extra to have their results altered. Ile spoke while aiming his pistol at the target. His pupils, connected to his firearm, were likely displaying an interface that assisted his aim. Swish! I drew my own gun. Around the shooting range, the gunshots of others occasionally echoed. While the Imperial Guard had a preference for melee weapons, they didn't neglect marksmanship training. Guards needed to be proficient with all equipment and weapons the Empire had to offer. Is it really possible to manipulate the selection process results? I asked again. Ile's grin deepened. There's no proof, but my gut tells me so. The Empire has been divided by rank and class for far too long. The illusion of meritocracy is slowly fading. With enough status and wealth, even the incompetent can make themselves appear competent. That's a dangerous thing to say, Ile. I warned him. To be honest, his bold words worried me. Could an Imperial citizen really say something like that, even if he was from a renowned household? Worried, I chuckled bitterly as I pulled the trigger. It seemed that I had grown close to Ile. Me, an orphanage kid, worrying about an heir of a noble family. Just as proof of that, Luca, those like you without any support system have never failed the advanced soldier cultivation process. They can't meddle with you using money or tricks. Only those who are truly exceptional make it. It's strange that they even have a special title like a regular for people like you. Of course, with his powerful background, he could afford to speak this freely. If I held similar thoughts, I'd never dare to voice them. In fact, I'd never even considered them. Could nobles really be incompetent? I had never thought of such a thing. Nobles were superior, while commoners, especially those from the lower classes, were incompetent. The Empire provided fair opportunities to all citizens through the selection process. Failure to seize that opportunity was seen as proof of incompetence, condemning one to an unsuccessful life. That's what I'd been told my whole life. I was living proof of it, though I came from the lowest class. I rose up by seizing the opportunity provided by the selection process. Luca, I know what you're thinking right now, but you only got this chance because your talent was undeniable. Letting someone as gifted as you stay outside the system would be more dangerous. Rather than letting a spark turn into an uncontrollable blaze, they'd rather bring it into the oven. The sound of gunfire partly masked Ilay's voice. He fired in rapid succession, each bullet piercing the same spot, leaving only a single hole in the target. And when an irregular like you, who rose from the bottom, succeeds, people can convince themselves that if they fail, it's because of their own lack of ability and accept the system as it is. The more I listened, the more dangerous Ilay's words sounded. Instinctively, I felt repulsed. In my view of the world, nothing he was saying made any sense. If I were to report exactly what you said to the headquarters, you won't be able to get away with it, even if you're a Karthika. Ilay looked at me with an unwavering smile, his fingers still pulling the trigger. Even while looking away, his aim remained impeccable. I know you won't do it. If you truly intended to report me, you wouldn't have even mentioned it in the first place. Thanks for worrying about me, Luca. Ilay spoke as if he were reading my mind. It annoyed me because he was right. The Akrisha Empire had two long-standing adversaries, the Bellado Federation and the Holy Kurite Alliance. Both were nations that had settled on planet Novus before the Empire. Opportunists who mistake cowardice for wisdom. That was what we thought of the Bellado Federation. Hypocritical zealots who preach sweet peace and justice while preparing for war. The Holy Kurite Alliance wasn't viewed any better. If anything, they were considered slightly more tolerable than Bellado, but only barely. The Empire scorned Bellado and regarded Kurite as an enemy. But there were those we viewed with even greater contempt. Bellado and Kurite, both branches from humanity's original roots on Earth, at least had some basis for mutual cooperation. There were times in the past when they'd reluctantly allied together. After all, they were still human, but entirely different alien species, who shared no such roots, weren't even worth associating with. Seeing aliens within the Empire was rare. If a foreign species happened to become a victim of a crime within the Empire, they received no protection or even the right to defend themselves. To us, discrimination against alien species felt entirely natural. Aliens had always tried to deceive and exploit the Empire. If we extended a hand of goodwill, they would only cut it off and steal it. That's the knowledge I'd heard and learned countless times. Yet I'd never personally encountered aliens or even Bellado or Kurite people, for that matter. Today would be the first time I'd see a Khoritan, but it wouldn't be a pleasant meeting. There would be bloodshed, though not ours, only theirs. Luca and Ilay will act as platoon leaders in this training. If any trainee has an issue with that, stand up and leave. The commander spoke while sitting on a rock, with Ilay and me standing on either side of him. In front of us, the cadets stood motionless, like machines. The cadets remained silent. No one objected to making Ilay and me the platoon leaders. Beyond that canyon lies a Khoritan outpost illegally occupying our territory. The commander pointed with his index finger toward a place beyond our sight. Drawing out his words, he finally issued the order. No prisoners. Kill them all. This was also part of our training. Without needing further instruction, the cadets gathered around Ilay and me. Our only weapons were melee weapons of personal preference and a single handgun each. The handguns we were issued were so low-powered they couldn't even pierce lightweight combat armor. They were practically meant for last resort suicide or close-quarters execution. We moved along a narrow cliff path in a silence so deep we could hear each other's breaths. After about 30 minutes, we took a short break. Without a word, everyone took turns keeping watch. Luca, see that? Our distinguished senior is watching us from afar. Ilay spoke, drinking from his water. Following his gaze, I looked toward the forest on the ridge above the canyon. Focusing intently, I could make out a shape shifting in the forest's shadows. The blurred outline was unmistakably the Legion, the full-body mechanical armor of the Imperial Guard. It looked like a steel giant standing among the trees. Officially, he was there to protect us, but his presence also served another purpose: surveillance. Surveillance. What exactly was he watching for? I shook my head to clear away the thoughts that followed. After the brief break, we resumed our march. Eventually, we spotted the outpost perched above the canyon. The front was enclosed by walls, but the rear, which backed onto the cliff, was open and exposed. They would never suspect we would climb up the cliff path. Kirk, we climbed the steep cliff barehanded. A fight would soon begin. Kill them all. No prisoners. I recalled the commander's order. When Ilay and I reached the edge of the cliff, We raised our heads just enough to survey the area. The other cadets clung to the cliff below us, waiting for instructions. My right mechanical eye was worth every penny, enhancing its detection across the visible light spectrum and allowing me to perceive the surrounding objects. The enhanced and corrected view was as clear as daylight. I saw two Coritans standing on the cliff edge. They wore clothes that billowed in the wind, the loose sleeves and hems fluttering. Their once white clothing now appeared worn, faded, and nearly gray. The two Coritans pulled out cigarettes, placing one in their mouths. The lighter's flame flared brightly before fading away. I blinked, turning off the glow of my mechanical eye, and raised my hand. "I'll take the left, you take the right." With a brief hand signal, we divided our roles. Ile and I would simultaneously strike the outpost from both sides. Whoosh! I was the first to scale the cliff. I pushed off the ground, hand gripping my sword's hilt. Clang clack! I passed right between the two men who had been smoking. Their dropped cigarette butts hit the ground, the red embers trailing as they fell. Then, their heads also rolled onto the ground. With my attack as the signal, a silent massacre began. Swish! The cadets and I stormed the outpost, slashing and stabbing everyone in sight. Whying! Whying! The alarm belatedly echoed throughout the outpost. The front of the base grew chaotic as guards stationed at the perimeter rushed toward us. Hacker! Upon seeing our precise movements and attire, they instantly recognized who we were. Fear gripped them immediately. They were already as good as defeated before even putting up a fight. Bang! An enemy gunshot echoed. It was a shot fired wildly in fear. None of us were foolish enough to get hit by it. Everyone instinctively scattered. Rat-a-tat-tat-tat. Gunfire continued in rapid succession. I skillfully evaded the barrage of bullets, advancing by circling around. Other cadets temporarily concealed themselves or used corpses as shields. I closed in on the Coritan firing the machine gun. He frantically tried to turn the gun toward me, realizing too late that he should have drawn his pistol instead. "You damn devil!" the Coritan shouted as he looked at me. I shrugged slightly and swung my blade. Slash clang! The Coritan's head split vertically from the temple, separating into two halves. The red cross-section of his philtrum and jaw was exposed with an unreal smoothness. I kicked the headless Coritan, toppling him over. Single quotes. Too easy. It seemed that Ile and I alone could wipe out this outpost. As expected, it was only natural. After all, we were destined to become elite soldiers of the Empire. I walked through the chaotic interior of the outpost as if I were taking a casual stroll. Mother, mom. I turned my head at the sound. A Coritan boy, round my age, was crawling along the ground. At first, I thought he might be injured. He's just too scared to even move properly. He wasn't using his perfectly healthy legs. Pathetic. The boy, still frantically calling for his mother, sensed my presence and raised his head. I hesitated for a moment, meeting his gaze. For the welfare of the Empire's citizens and the glory of His Majesty, I mouthed the words silently, attempting to steady my mind, but an uneasy feeling crept over me, and I halted my hand. If only the boy had a knife or a gun in his hands, I wouldn't hesitate. I'd cleanly sever his neck, a non-combatant who offers no resistance. But my orders were to kill every Coritan here. Thunk! I drove my sword downward. It grazed the back of the boy's neck, embedding itself in the ground. "Lie down like you're dead, then you might survive," I whispered while pulling the sword free. My heart was stirring with doubt and unease. If another cadet noticed my actions, my life could be in danger. But I acted on impulse, risking that danger. A wave of guilt, untouched even by murder, suddenly swept over me. This isn't right, Luca. The Empire's command is absolute. It must not be disobeyed. Even now, I should slit the boy's throat. I bit my lower lip, glaring down at him fiercely. The Empire's orders were pushing against my back and my hands. My body wanted to act not of my own will, but by the Empire's will, and I didn't like that. I hesitated. Bang! A gunshot rang out. The bullet pierced through the boy's head. He was likely dead before he even registered it. I looked toward the origin of the gunshot. Ile stood on the rooftop of a nearby building, smoke lazily drifting from his pistol. He looked at me, shaking his head slightly from side to side. It meant he'd seen everything, but it was Ile, and because of that, I felt relieved. If it had been any cadet other than Ile who saw me hesitate, I would have had to find a way to silence that cadet by persuasion or, if that failed, by any means necessary. Ile won't report my hesitation to the superiors. In any case, today's fool is me. My mind snapped back into focus. I realized exactly what I had almost done. I'd nearly endangered both myself and my comrades by sparing some nameless Khoritan boy. Out of misplaced mercy, I looked back up at Ile on the rooftop, intending to at least nod in thanks. But at that moment, whoom, the air distorted beside Ile. I opened my eyes wide. Even my military-grade mechanical eye couldn't immediately process what was happening. It was a phenomenon that defied the laws of physics. Bang! An explosion erupted next to Ile. It wasn't caused by a projectile. The air around him had simply warped and then expanded violently. "You worthless bastards!" A rough voice boomed out. I immediately sprinted toward where Ile had been. Ile, caught in the explosion, had fallen from the rooftop, a good 3 stories high, and landed on the ground. "Luca, there's a Force user. I was careless. I've got no excuse." Ile was barely standing, leaning against a wall. He seemed to have shielded his head and body with his arms and legs, sparing his life. His limbs, which had absorbed the brunt of the blast, were now exposed, with components and bundles of wires sticking out. "I'll handle it. You stay put." I focused on the clearing at the center of the outpost. That's where the disturbance was coming from. Force. It was my first time encountering one in person. I only knew about them from knowledge alone. A kind of superpower. Force users could create phenomena that defied the laws of physics. The explosion that had struck Ile was one such phenomenon. Did the commander of the Imperial Guard know there was a Force user here? If they'd given us a warning, Ile might have avoided injury. I shook my head as I ran toward the clearing. A foolish thought. We should have been prepared for anything. Ile was injured because he was careless, and his carelessness was also partly because of me. Because of my hesitation, Ile was injured. For the first time in a long while, I felt disgusted with myself. "Don't ever let this happen again, Luca." In the clearing, the fight between the Force user and the cadets was already underway. This isn't a military base. It's a settlement. The people you killed were just trying to survive. The Force user's shout was filled with rage. He looked like an ordinary middle-aged man, but a faint blue aura rippled over his skin. His loose Khoritan clothing billowed around him, defying gravity. Bang! Explosions erupted in the direction the Force user gestured. His rage-fueled attack swept the cadets off their feet, flinging them in all directions. Bang! One of the fallen cadets fired a shot. A thin barrier surrounded the Force user, but the feeble pistol shot failed to penetrate it. This isn't a good matchup. With our current equipment, he was a difficult enemy to confront. No need to panic. It was my first time fighting a Force user, but I'd already learned how to handle one. Today was simply the day to put it into practice. It's never as simple in the field as it is in theory, but I gripped my sword in one hand and my pistol in the other as I charged forward. Bang! Bang! I fired, knowing it would do no real damage. The shots were meant to draw his attention. "I'll take care of this guy," I signaled to the other cadets. We hadn't yet fully secured the outpost. Following my directions, the cadets dispersed to finish taking control of it. Where do you think you're going? You bastards! Come on, come at me." As the cadets scattered, the Force user became visibly flustered. So he was planning to act as a decoy on his own. There's no need for us to fall for that. I focused on the Force user's arm. In order for one to use Force, the user needs to perform a preparatory action. If I watch his actions, I can react accordingly. The Force user's ability revolved around explosions, following a clear cause and effect sequence. Like pulling a trigger to fire a bullet, he determined the direction of each explosion with a hand gesture, and just before each blast, a necklace wrapped like a chain around his hand would glow blue. That necklace was the catalyst for his ability. Hand gesture, the light reaction of the catalyst, and then the explosion. That was the sequence. Now that I understood the process, I had plenty of time to evade. Dodging bullets was harder. It was only due to the unfamiliar nature of his attacks that the other cadets had fallen so easily. Boom! An explosion went off beside me. I moved only at the last moment, speeding up just before each blast. The Force user furrowed his brows, watching my unpredictable movements. Boom! Another explosion erupted. The range was wider than I'd anticipated, and I took some of the impact. Staggering, I caught myself on the ground and jumped to the side. Kaboom! The spot where I had been standing exploded. The blast radius was expanding, and the intervals between explosions were now shorter. He was adjusting his attacks to counter my erratic movements. Grr! The Force user was pushing himself to the limit. Veins stood out on his face, red and strained. But I was also pushing myself to the limit. I'd like to drag this into a war of attrition, but I can't sustain high-speed maneuvers for long. Even with my high-powered prosthetic legs, the rest of my biological body couldn't keep up. The sudden stops and accelerations were making my hip joint scream. At this rate, I'll break down first. I had to charge while I could still maintain top speed. Whoosh! I lunged straight forward. The Force user stood at the end of my path. Faster! I ignored the pain. If my body broke down, the Empire would fix it. As long as my head remained intact, the rest would be dealt with somehow. Phew! The Force user steadied his breath and thrust both hands out in front of him. Seeing the glow of the catalyst necklace, I anticipated an explosion and accelerated. But the explosion I expected didn't happen. My heart dropped. The scythe of death brushed against the back of my neck. A feint. A fraction of a second later, the air in front of me warped. The Force user knew how to wield his ability skillfully. His quick adaptability suggested he had extensive combat experience. If I pull back now, my body was accelerating too much to stop. Slamming on the brakes would shatter my hip joints. Even if I survived this moment, I wouldn't be able to dodge the next attack. I'll push forward even faster. The decision was instant. It could mean my death. Despite seeing the signs of an impending explosion, I didn't back off. I charged straight through the warping air. It felt as though my skin was tearing against searing hot spikes. Kaboom! The explosion went off right behind me. Scorching pain slashed across my back. In a critical moment, pain had to be ignored. I didn't pay attention to the state of my body. My focus was solely on the Force user. Finally, my sword reached him. I stretched my arm, driving the tip of my sword into the Force user's chest. The blade tore through his Force barrier, slicing through his skin and muscle, embedding itself deep in his chest. Gah! Wah! The Force user staggered, looking at me. Blood spilled from his mouth as he raised the hand holding his catalyst necklace toward me. The necklace glowed a faint blue, a precursor to a Force explosion. Is this his final attack? I had no way to dodge it. I raised my head to look at his face. He, too, was looking at mine. Now that I see you up close, you're just a kid, the Force user muttered faintly as he lowered his hand. My eyes widened. Whoom! The Force aura that had gathered in his hand dispersed, brushing past me before dissipating entirely. There was no explosion. Blood. The light faded from the Force user's eyes. His lifeless body collapsed weakly to the ground. The Force user had a profound impact on me. My back, battered by the explosion, was a total wreck, devoid of any intact spot. My pelvis and hip joints, damaged from high-speed maneuvers, had turned pitch black with necrosis. For a lower-class citizen, it was a severe injury. Artificial skin made from synthetic fibers, military-grade alloys to replace bones. Even just these would cost quite a bit. If I hadn't been a cadet in the Imperial Guard, I doubted I'd be able to pay it off, even after a lifetime of work. For this level of injury, a lower-class family would give up on treatment and request euthanasia instead. Fortunately, as an orphan, I had the solid support of the Imperial Guard in place of a lower-class family. By the time I drifted in and out of anesthesia a few times, the surgery had been completed. I turned around and looked at myself in the mirror. The artificial skin adhered smoothly to my back. Only faint, map-like seams remained, unevenly aligned. The doctor said that once the integration is complete, the seams won't show at all. Though it wasn't necessary to make it this pristine, the care taken in the surgery was obvious. Creak. I stretched out my hand toward the table and displayed my body map in a hologram. The joints and bones that had been replaced with metal glowed in blue. They seemed like they could last for a century. This is a body I'll eventually discard anyway. In a few years, I'd have a fully mechanical body. My natural flesh was like a baby tooth, something to be used temporarily and discarded. If I'd expended it with as much purpose as I had now, I couldn't ask for anything better. At any rate, I survived. I let out a small sigh as I sat on the edge of the bed. The Force user's final moments replayed endlessly in my mind. The Force user withdrew his attack at the end. He didn't kill me. No matter how many times I thought about it, I reached the same conclusion. The Force user had let me live. He'd looked closely at my face, then withdrawn his hand with a bitter smile. I also tried to spare the Corriton boy, but that's because he was a non-combatant, incapable of killing me. I found it hard to forget the Force user's last words. He had looked at me and called me a kid. I am already a warrior, a soldier, If you spared me simply because I was a kid, you're a fool. It infuriated me. If there was any way, I wanted to bring him back to life and fight him once more. Thanks to the old man's pathetic mercy, I survived. I didn't want to admit it, but like it or not, it was the truth. An unchanging, immutable truth. I don't believe in an afterlife, but if there is a world beyond, I hope he's watching me from there. I'm going to kill more Coritans in the future. Watch your own people die by my hand and regret it, even from the afterlife. That was my revenge on him. I would never make the same mistake he did. I spent an entire month running and walking inside a water tank filled with healing fluid, charged with microcurrents. I felt fully recovered, yet the doctor still refused to issue my discharge report. Another month dragged on like that. The healing fluid in the water tank was blue, a depressingly pale blue at that. To make things worse, its texture was unpleasantly sticky. Spending hours every day walking and running in it made me feel like I was losing my mind. I started to think I'd rather be stabbed or shot than go through this. For the past 2 months, I was no different from a rat running on a wheel. I need psychiatric counseling. I addressed to the Imperial Guard commander through the hologram screen. He looked at me with a puzzled expression. Are you traumatized from the injury? That doesn't seem like you. No, it's not related to the combat. I quickly shook my head. As a mere cadet, I shouldn't be contacting the Imperial Guard commander over something like this. But I was that desperate. If I spend even one more day here, I'm going to grab the doctor by the head and shove him into the tank. This isn't a joke. The commander burst into loud laughter as soon as he heard me. He laughed for a long time before finally speaking. Psychiatric counseling isn't necessary. You're perfectly normal. The next day, a member of the Imperial Guard came to get me. My attending physician looked dissatisfied, but signed the papers the guard handed over. One glance at the guard's uniform was enough to recognize him from a distance. His black coat with a crimson lining hung heavily, almost sweeping the ground as it swayed. On his chest, there was an embroidered golden insignia of a sword. HUD. The guard who had escorted me out of the hospital stopped walking. He looked down at me, his gaze steady. I saw his shoulders and arms shift slightly. Here it came. Blood. The guard's heavy fist landed in my abdomen. I doubled over, groaning. It felt like my insides were twisting up. You know why you're getting hit, don't you? The rim of the guard's pupils glowed with a red light. I overstepped my boundaries. I managed to squeeze out a response. The impact made it hard to catch my breath. Good. If you'd said you didn't know, I would have beaten you to a pulp and sent you back to the hospital. A mere cadet had made a personal request to the Imperial Guard commander. I didn't offer any excuses. In truth, there was nothing to excuse. I deserved it. Plain and simple. Thank you. I clasped my hands behind my back, leaving my torso exposed. If there were more blows to take, I was prepared for them. The guard, seeing my stance, gave a slight smirk, barely lifting the corners of his mouth. Make sure you become an Imperial Guard, Luca. I feel like training you would be worth it. He spoke while placing a hand on my shoulder. 2 days had passed since I returned to the training grounds. Being able to move my body again made me feel alive. So, how does it feel to come back from the afterlife? Ile spoke as he lifted a 100-kilogram dumbbell with one hand. During free time, many cadets gathered at the training grounds. Look who's talking. You nearly died too, I replied while doing handstand push-ups. Ile had also been caught in the force explosion and sustained considerable injuries. Maintaining a delicate balance, I pushed off the ground with my arms. Spinning in the air, I landed lightly. Luckily, even after a couple of months of rest, my reflexes hadn't dulled. I was ready to jump right back into training. Even with cybernetic implants that had predetermined energy output, training was crucial not for muscle development, but for the nervous system's coordination and responsiveness. An untrained civilian couldn't control a full-body mechanical armor well enough to utilize its performance, and they'd barely be able to manage their own movements. They wouldn't even be able to defeat me in my natural state. A body the mind can't keep up with only leads to disaster. In particular, we had undergone chemical treatments to optimize our nervous systems and completed rigorous daily training to prepare for eventual use of the full-body mechanical armor. Legion. The commander must have known the Force user was there. He just kept quiet and put us to the test. Ile remarked, throwing a punch while still gripping the dumbbell. His arm accelerated, and he began shadowboxing with the 100-kilogram weight. The motor sound from his cybernetic arm roaring intensely. No fatalities, so that's good enough. Get up here, Ile. I spoke nonchalantly as I stepped onto the sparring ring. Luca, my arm was completely wrecked in the fight, so I upgraded to a better one. Think you can handle it? You're full of talk. Did you replace your arm? Or was it your tongue? I wiggled my index finger to taunt him. Ile tossed the dumbbell aside and hopped up onto the ring with ease. Luca, don't you think it's a bit strange that there were no fatalities? He assumed a fighting stance in front of me as he spoke. Sounds like you're saying it would have been better if there had been casualties? I replied, lightly throwing a punch. Ile tilted his head back, easily dodging it. Whoosh! We threw punches and kicks in quick succession. We were only loosening up, moving just slowly enough to dodge each other. Of course, slow was a relative term. If any of those blows landed solidly, they'd have enough force and speed to break bones. That's not what I mean. That force user could have killed me, I think. He deliberately kept his distance and triggered the force explosion. That's why I survived, and so did the other cadets caught in the blast. Hearing Ile's words, I couldn't hold back the irritation bubbling up. How weak could that force user have been? He'd only wanted to subdue us, not kill. That's why he ultimately fell by my hand. I let my anger drive the speed of my punches up. Ile reacted quickly, deflecting my fist to the side. Hey, are you trying to smash my face? Ile grumbled at the sudden increase in pace. I've always wanted to flatten that smug face of yours. Seems I raised a tiger cub. There was a hint of amusement in Ile's relaxed grin. Oh please, who's raising who? Now, let's go all out, Ile. I paused, taking a deep breath and focusing. I visualized expanding the bandwidth of my nervous system. Electrical signals and chemicals surged through the extended neural pathways, connecting my brain and body in perfect synchronization. I could see the pores on Ile's skin with my heightened vision. I could even hear his heartbeat in my ears. My sense of smell became so acute that I could probably guess what he'd eaten for breakfast. Ile, too, had finished activating his body. His eyes had a faint glow, like he could see right through me. The clanking in the training grounds came to a halt. Other cadets had gathered to watch the match between me and Ile. Hands and feet moved in a blur. I sharpened my senses, dodging and deflecting Ile's attacks. He did the same. The shifts between offense and defense happened so rapidly that it was hard to tell who held the upper hand. Eee! A high-pitched sound, one only I could hear, resonated from my limbs. Now that we'd entered high-speed combat, I was quickly approaching the limits of my mechanical body. My movements were starting to slow, just slightly. I needed to either stop here or bring this to a decisive end. Looks like Ile really did upgrade his arm to something better. Ile's arm was still moving at full speed. I opened my outstretched fist, attempting to grab hold of his arm. Creak! My fingertips caught onto Ile's arm. Pulling on it, I threw him off balance. Success! Ile wobbled. The opening was brief, but for me, it was more than enough time. Lud! I kicked his leg out from under him and slipped to the side. Lud! Ile fell and looked up at me. I waved my hand, which had started to smoke. The cadets who had been watching let out low exclamations and gasps of admiration. They could all tell that I'd turned the disadvantage round with a bit of quick thinking. I thought I'd win this time. Ile panted, chuckling. When it came to hand-to-hand combat, I always had the upper hand. If getting stronger were as easy as adding better parts, then why would we go through all this trouble? I extended a hand toward the fallen Ile as I spoke. Ile took my hand, standing up while fixing his gaze on me. His usually steady smile faltered just a bit. He cautiously began to speak. Luca, back then, you. Sensing the eyes of the other cadets, Ile trailed off. Even without him finishing, I knew what he was going to say. I wondered why he hadn't asked me sooner. He probably wants to know why I tried to let that Corrigan boy go. Thanks to Ile, I managed to cover up my mistake. His bullet had gone through the Corrigan boy's head instead of my blade. I still remembered that moment with perfect clarity. It was a mistake. It won't happen again. I responded quickly. Hearing my words, Ile narrowed his eyes, giving a slightly forced smile. By now, I could read his expressions well enough to get a sense of his emotions. Most likely, Ile wasn't looking for this kind of kin response. He remained as unreadable as ever. The life of a cadet in the Imperial Guard lasted for years, and we were nearing the end of our second year. At this point, a new class joined beneath us, and most of our instructors who had trained us had moved over to them, making themselves scarce around us. You two are capable of aiming for the Centurion rank. Strive forward for His Majesty the Emperor and the citizens of the Empire. Our head instructor, who had overseen us for the past 2 years, Said this before he transferred to the new class. By you two, he was referring to me and Ile. By the second year, the hierarchy among classmates was also fully set. Any talent that might blossom had already done so. We had learned all the fundamental combat techniques. All that was left was to apply them through practical experience. Centurion. The organization of the Imperial Guard was straightforward. There were 1,000 Imperial Guardsmen, consisting of 10 sentries all commanded by a chief centurion. The commander of the guards, the chief centurion, is also the centurion of the first century. The remaining 9 sentries were divided according to service length and role. For a cadet like me, who had completed full-body mechanization, the first post was in the 10th century, the lowest-ranking unit consisting of rookies. After gaining experience in the 10th century, one could advance up to the 5th century, and beyond that, each would be assigned to one of the 1st to 5th upper centuries based on specialty and role. If I became the 10th centurion, promotion would come fast. It'd mean being recognized as outstanding among new Imperial Guardsmen. The position was one that any cadet with high training scores aimed for. I'm not particularly ambitious about becoming a centurion. Luca, do you want to be a centurion? When we were alone, Ile spoke with his usual carefree tone. Unlike you, I have nowhere to return to. If I don't rise, I'll only sink. With an Imperial Guard record, you'll be treated as an elite wherever you go. You're now in a place that doesn't care about where you come from. Try to relax a little. Ile tapped his fist lightly against my chest as he spoke. Ile was right. I had risen to a position where I could afford to take it easy, but my anxiety was also what drove me. The ever-present sense of standing precariously on a tightrope. I didn't want to lose that. Suddenly, a question about Ile rose. Why does Ile want to become an Imperial Guardsman? Ile was incredibly talented. Honestly, I thought when it came to talent he surpassed me. The difference was, Ile didn't push himself as desperately as I did. He seemed to take everything lightly, yet his results were similar to mine. Swish. I leaned my arms and back against the railing. The privileged young master jumped up onto the railing with a bound. Whoosh. Ile stood on the railing, facing the wind. At a glance, it looked precarious, but to us, it was as steady as standing on level ground. Double quotes. Our family, the Karthika family, is a renowned house that has produced many generals of the Empire. Ile spoke as if he had read my thoughts. I was already accustomed to this sort of presumptive way of speaking from him. Ile Karthika. As someone from an orphanage, I couldn't grasp the full scope of the Karthika family's influence. All I understood was that they were a prestigious household. So, you're saying that the path to success is open to you even if you only do the bare minimum. I spoke with a sneer. Half of it was a joke, but the other half was genuine. Ile chuckled, then leapt up, performing a flip on the narrow railing. His feet traced a clean arc in the air. I originally wanted to be a scholar, an archaeologist who delves into the mysteries of ancient arcane civilizations. An archaeologist? It was the first time I'd heard of such a job. At my question, Ile smiled a light, almost whimsical smile. In Balato or Kurite, it's a somewhat promising career. The arcane civilizations have endless secrets to uncover. I fell silent for a moment. Just as Ile had shielded my naive act of mercy, I, too, refrained from reporting his subversive words to the higher-ups. If that's what you want, then just go for it. After extending my senses to confirm there was no one nearby, I spoke. In the Empire, studying arcane civilizations without permission is forbidden. And besides, my family wouldn't allow me to do anything other than serve as a soldier. A noble house earns its reputation by consistently producing talent in a particular field. Ile spoke as if he bore the weight of the world's sorrows, his eyes filled with melancholy. Are you saying it's sad you can't do what you want? What a pampered complaint. I was angry. This time, I meant it. The city's underbelly was filled with people who didn't even have the guarantee of surviving each day. Wanting to do something was a luxury. For them, work that kept them alive was what mattered. You're right. To you, my words probably sound like a spoiled complaint, but for me, it's real. Ile stood there, unruffled. You need to go hungry and suffer a bit more. I spoke with contempt. Even at my harsh words, Ile didn't flinch. My family doesn't know about my dream. You're the only one I've told, Luca. If I reported what you just told me, you'd be finished. But you won't do that, just like I kept your secret. That time, you showed mercy to a Khoritan. Ile squatted down on the railing. He lowered his gaze to match my eye level. I frowned, studying Ile's face. I only hesitated because he was a non-combatant. Even if you hadn't acted, I would have killed him in the end. The commander ordered us to kill all the Corotans there. The fact that you hesitated at all means you're someone who could defy orders from the top. Don't spout nonsense. I'm loyal to the Empire and the Emperor. They acknowledged my talents. The Empire's enemies are my enemies. Ile looked at me, then moved his lips. Even if that enemy is me, whoever it may be. I spoke with hostility. It was now clear. Ile Karthika was dangerous. There was a possibility he could become an enemy of the Empire. Luca, if you truly went beyond loyalty to pure obedience, you'd be trying to kill me right now. I didn't respond to Ile's words. I only glared at him sharply. Ile nodded, as if taking my silence as his answer. He then leaned backward and jumped off the railing. Looking down, I saw Ile land effortlessly from the height of the 3rd floor. That reckless bastard. I muttered as I watched Ile's retreating figure. Ile lacked nothing status, talent, everything one could envy, yet he was chasing after something strange. You'll end up dead that way, idiot. I sighed involuntarily. For cadets in their 3rd year, after basic training, it was a continuous cycle of live operations. It was also a period when casualties increased. Rattle, rattle. Rain poured down relentlessly. Ile, 3 other cadets, and I pressed our waterproof hoods down tightly as we pushed through the dense forest. 5 cadets walked in silence through the rain. Our mission was reconnaissance. As cadets, we had to take on all sorts of minor missions to build diverse experiences. Someone without field experience would, in the future, only spout unrealistic theories from behind a desk when put in charge. For soldiers, and especially for commanders, incompetence and ignorance were the greatest sins and failings. Swish. I raised my hand to signal a break. We gathered under a tree to shelter from the rain. One of the cadets, who lacked sleep, closed his eyes and quickly fell into a deep sleep. Sleep control was also one of the combat techniques we had learned. Crunch, crunch. As I chewed on a ration bar, I scanned the surroundings. With the rain falling at night, visibility was poor. The forest, lashed by the wind and rain, swayed ominously, as though it might devour us. Somewhere out there, a legion-clad Imperial Guard is surely watching over us. Even though it was a real operation, it was still part of our training. If we encountered enemies beyond our capability, the Imperial Guard would step in. The Force user last time command must have deemed them manageable for us, and that turned out to be the case. Had Ile not been injured first, he and I would have been enough to handle that opponent. If we had coordinated our attacks, we would have dealt with them easily. This mission is a reconnaissance mission. I closed my eyes, reviewing the mission in my mind. The place we were stepping into was an uncharted neutral zone. It wasn't yet under anyone's territory. Anyone we encountered here could be considered an enemy. Ile isn't his usual self. I shifted my gaze, observing Ile as he drank water. His face didn't show any signs of fatigue, rather. He seemed visibly excited. Is he really that thrilled just to see an arcane ruin? The arcane ruins were the target of this reconnaissance mission. The site was surrounded by waves that interfered with monitoring, so we had to conduct an on-site inspection. Swish. I stood up, patting Ile's shoulder. It was our turn to stand watch. Isn't it amazing? There were civilizations that explored the stars before we humans even existed. Ile chattered excitedly. I couldn't share his fascination and merely shrugged. The ancient arcane civilization. I knew only the basics. I'd heard it was a civilization that spanned the entire universe in the distant past. Traces of it remained wherever one went in space. I don't care about the arcane or whatever. They're just people who died ages ago. Despite my negative reaction, Ile neither looked disappointed nor offended. Luca, it's because of the past that we have the present, and that record allows us to predict the future. Even though Ile explained it like it was profound, it didn't resonate with me. He didn't seem intent on making me understand, either. After resting and recovering, we prepared to move again. Just before setting out, one of the cadets approached me. Claude Reimanis. The Reimanis family wasn't as influential as the Karthika family, but it was still a notable household, even as someone from the lowest ranks. My cadet life among noble heirs had taught me about the subtle balances and power structures within noble families. Luca, I have a younger sister. Claude Reimanis brought this up out of nowhere. I tilted my head, puzzled. So, if you're not involved with anyone, I'd like to introduce you to my sister. I'm an orphanage kid. There wasn't a single cadet who didn't know my background. Whether you're from an orphanage or a noble family, we'll end up as Imperial Guards all the same. Who knows? You might even be my superior one day. I looked at Claude's face. He wasn't teasing. Nor was he speaking casually. He's serious. It was a sudden proposal, yet in a way, I understood it. Coming from an orphanage, I had no ties to complex political affairs. Ile once mentioned that some families might appreciate my unburdened background. I don't think it's a bad offer. I know you're close with Ile, but there aren't any women left in the Karthika family. I haven't thought about anything like this before. Besides, we're on a mission. I paused before replying. I'm not asking you to answer right now. Just think about it. Claude nodded and stepped back. Ile, who had overheard my conversation with Claude, nudged my arm with his elbow. Quite popular, Luca. Shut up. We continued moving toward the ruins. As we neared the center of the forest, remnants of partially destroyed metal structures began to emerge. So this is an arcane site. Ile scanned the surroundings, moving closer to one of the shattered pillars. VMM. When Ile's hand touched the silvery metal pillar, a faint blue light rippled from the point of contact before dissipating. This structure is millions of years old, yet it still has an energy response. Ile couldn't hide his awe. Double quotes. Ilay. We're on a mission here. I frowned. Oh, sorry. For a moment, it seemed like Ile had forgotten the mission entirely. His face was filled with wonder, open and unguarded like that of a child. It was the first time I'd seen this side of him. Whoosh. I signaled to reorganize the formation. We planned to examine the structure and scale of the arcane ruins and then head back. And if there happened to be any artifacts to recover, we were to collect them immediately. Silently, we moved between the covers provided by broken walls. The silvery roads branched out in all directions, converging at what appeared to be the center of the ruins. Claude, over here. I gestured to Claude. Normally, I would have partnered with Ile as the lead scout, but he seemed too distracted today to be reliable. The other cadets were in position behind pillars and walls, rifles at the ready. Under their cover, Claude and I approached the ruins. Vying, I activated my mechanical eye on the right, attempting to analyze the surroundings. However, the unique energy waves from the ruins deflected the analysis attempt. My eyelid throbbed as heat began to spread from my forehead. Crackle. A strange noise came from up ahead. Claude and I held our breath, moving slowly and cautiously. There's something in front of us. Inside the ruins stood 6 massive pillars. At the center of them was a pedestal that looked almost like an altar. I opened my eyes wide. Creak, crackle. Above the pedestal, a cube was hovering, rotating in midair. It was about the size of a human head, and with each rotation, the color of its sides changed. A continuous sound of gears seemed to echo from within, as if machinery inside was interlocking. And beneath that cube stood someone. The moment I identified them, my face froze and then twisted. Damn, every nerve in my body was on edge. My instincts and reason were both screaming danger. If the Empire had the Imperial Guard, then the Holy Kharit Alliance had the Paladin. One of those Paladin was standing right in front of us. I recognized it instantly just from the armor. The elaborate armor, adorned with fine detail, was a mix of blue and white. Melee weapons like a spear and sword were strapped to his back and waist. His face was hidden beneath a helmet pulled low. VMM. The Khoritan Paladin turned his head. A blue light flickered from within his helmet. His gaze was fixed directly on us. Whoosh. The Paladin made a gesture. The spear on his back glowed with a blue light, lifting into the air by itself. The spear shone brightly as if the light was engulfing it. The brilliant light was paradoxically chilling. We knew instinctively that it was dangerous. Khoritan Paladin were unparalleled masters of force abilities. I couldn't finish my sentence. Everything happened in an instant. Just as the spear disappeared, it whizzed past me. Crunch. The spear had pierced straight through Claude's temple. The spear continued through his body, impaling him, before embedding itself into a pillar. Claude was dead, and I was next. Blood streamed down Claude's face, whose head was impaled by the spear. Though his brain had ceased, his body trembled with residual signals, like the last echoes of consciousness. There was no time for prayers. Vaz. The spear embedded in Claude's head glowed once more. That light was force. A thin thread of the aura connected it to the Paladin's hand. With the Paladin's body encased in armor, it was nearly impossible to distinguish what was serving as the force's catalyst. The spear of the Paladin shimmered again, transforming back into light, and withdrew from Claude's head. Swish. The light slashed through the air. The spear, now in physical form again, returned to the Paladin's hand. Creak, creak. A headache flared up. My right mechanical eye switched to combat mode, attempting to predict the spear's trajectory. All it produced was a flood of errors. There was no way to calculate it. The Force's powers, which defied physical laws, were beyond computation. The Paladin of the Holy Correct Alliance distorted space and transformed matter into light. Forget these meaningless calculations. I dismissed the trajectory prediction function of my right eye and shut it off. I had to rely on my instincts and intuition, not the computer's calculations. Bang! A gunshot rang out. Cadets who were covering Claude and me opened fire. They tried to maneuver closer to my position while shooting. We were competent soldiers, but fully armored paladins were not foes we could handle with our combat abilities. His combat prowess rivaled that of an Imperial Guard equipped with the Legion. Even if we tried to escape, there was no escaping the Paladin's reach. We had to fight to buy time. The Imperial Guard reinforcements will come. An Imperial Guard member observing us was likely on their way right now. The wait would last only a few seconds, but each of those seconds felt unbearably long. Buzz! The Paladin's spear was glowing once more. It was hard to tell when to dodge, even though I saw it coming. But I couldn't hesitate. I crouched down, tucking my body and legs tightly before diving to the side and rolling away instinctively. Then, I dove to the side, rolling away instinctively. Whoosh! The spear appeared where my head had just been. The trailing glow of force lingered behind it like a tail. I wanted to check the Paladin's next move, but even dodging the spear aimed at my back was overwhelming. Creak! The floating spear spun around, changing direction. Its tip was now aimed at me. It seemed impossible to dodge this time. After Claude, I would be the next to die. Yes, I had lost this battle before it even began. I had believed I couldn't withstand this enemy, and had only run, cornered into a dead end, like a pig being led to slaughter. When the enemy swung their sword, I had to swing mine. That was the way to survive on the battlefield. Showing your back only meant a bullet in the back of your head. I gripped the hilt with both hands. Underneath the synthetic skin, the circuits of my prosthetic arm glowed a deep red, like blood vessels. I pushed my energy output to the maximum. Before that spear disappears, I would strike first. Kaang! I advanced and slashed at the spear hanging in mid-air. It was before the light of the Force fully enveloped it. Crash! My interference triggered a Force explosion. The spear, having lost control, spun wildly before embedding itself in the ground. Crackle, crackle. The synthetic skin on my prosthetic arm peeled off in layers. My fingers, caught in the explosion, were broken, twisted, and left tattered. Current sparks flew from exposed wires. The spear has stopped for now. It looked like the connection between the Paladin and the spear had been severed. I turned my gaze toward the Paladin. Shing! The Paladin pulled out a sword instead of the spear and lowered it. Whoosh! He swung the sword through the air repeatedly. The trail of the blade formed crescents of light, gathering into the shape of a crescent moon. There were 3 crescent blades in total. As soon as they took full form, they cut across the ground, racing forward. I opened my eyes wide. This was easier to predict than the spear. I thought I could dodge it, but this time, it wasn't aimed at me. The crescent blades descended on the cadets who were covering me. From behind, groans and low screams escaped. I couldn't tell how many were hit or killed. All of this unfolded in under 10 seconds, yet each moment felt unbearably long. Just as defeat began to feel inevitable, the rescuer we'd been waiting for arrived. Bang! An explosion struck beside the Paladin's head, filling the air with thick, acrid smoke. Screech, screech. I moved my pupils toward the sound. Eyes glowing red emerged, cutting through the underbrush. A member of the Imperial Guard, clad in the Legion full-body mechanical armor, emerged from the ruins. Stripped of all unnecessary and fragile organs, this being was a weapon unto itself. The armor seemed to move with a life of its own. My right mechanical eye recognized the Imperial Guard. Information flashed before my eyes. The Imperial Guard standard combat mechanical armor, Legion. Model designation, Hector. The pinnacle of the Empire's advanced technology had appeared in this place. Whoosh! The cloak that shrouded Legion's frame fluttered. Its limbs were long, and its waist was narrow. It had no digestive organs, and, naturally, no mouth. The Legion combat mechanical armor, with its armored form, had no human face and could not display expressions. As a result, it showed not even a hint of emotion. There were no parts or functions for eating, sleeping, or reproduction, though designed purely for combat without regard for human activities. The Legion mechanical armor seemed to retain a fierce instinct for battle. It was a weapon that pursued extreme practicality and efficiency in warfare. Thunk! The Imperial Guard, Legion, extended his hand and pulled the trigger. In his hand was a crude revolver. It was called a handgun, but its caliber and power were on par with artillery rounds. Boom! The bullet fired by the Imperial Guard struck the paladin repeatedly. Yet, the paladin appeared largely unharmed. Each explosion triggered a faint, translucent glow from his force shield. The blue and white armor showed not even a smudge. Click! The Imperial Guard tossed the gun to the ground, then reached toward his back. Creak! A weapon latch on his back opened, and the halberd, hidden under his cloak, emerged with a massive presence. He swung the weapon, which was as large as his own body, with ease. Lud! The Imperial Guard brought the blade of the halberd down to the ground, and started striding toward the paladin. Freeing! The paladin advanced with his sword, as if moving to meet the Imperial Guard. The paladin was a head shorter than the Imperial Guard, yet the intimidating aura of his force, visible as an aura of light, made him seem equally imposing. The two monsters exchanged no words. They acted as if it were only natural to consider each other mortal enemies. Only murderous intent and animosity passed between them. Clang! The Imperial Guard's halberd collided with the paladin's sword. Blue sparks and red embers burst forth, scattering toward each other. The movements of their weapons and arms were so swift they were nearly impossible to track. Their sounds and movements even fell out of sync. Crack! The paladin's shoulder armor shattered under the impact of the halberd. Screech! The sword sliced across the Imperial Guard's chest. The metallic exterior tore like fabric. Crash! The halberd and the sword clashed head-on, and a struggle of strength began. Scree! The Imperial Guard gripped the halberd with one hand and began pushing the paladin back. The paladin's body staggered, bending backward as though he might fall. The mechanical strength of the Imperial Guard seemed to give him the advantage. Crack! The Imperial Guard reached out with his free hand and grasped the paladin's face. A grinding sound came from the paladin's helmet as the metal dented. He seemed ready to crush the skull and seize the brain within. At a glance, it seemed like the Imperial Guard was winning, but the paladin pulled one of his hands away from the hilt, leaving just one hand gripping his sword. Even with only one hand, he was still holding his ground. The paladin, who had been losing ground with both hands, was now holding steady with just one. Something was off. A feint. That thought crossed my mind. The paladin was pretending to be pushed back. He was angling to exploit an opening, even if it meant exposing his head. These two monsters were so evenly matched that he had to take such a gamble to stand a chance. Whoosh! The paladin moved his free hand. His fingers twitched, re-establishing a force link with the spear that had flown away. If the spear was once again bound to his force, it would soon return to its luminous form. I had to stop the paladin from controlling the spear. I tried to grip my sword, but all my fingers were shattered. I couldn't hold it. Buzz! While I hesitated, the spear embedded in the ground started to tremble, then rose up. The light around it intensified, enveloping the spear. It would soon aim for the Imperial Guard's head. Today, luck just wasn't on my side. An extreme solution came to mind. The only things I had left were my legs. I didn't even have time to sigh. I braced myself against the ground and leapt, spinning through the air. As I rotated mid-air, I brought my heel down hard on the spear shaft. Screech! With my powerful strike, the spear wobbled, tipping to the side. But the light enveloping the spear started crawling up my leg, spreading cracks of light through it like an infection. At any moment, my foot could explode. Shria! The spear, covered in light, disappeared. The resulting explosion threw me to the ground, and I rolled, hearing the sound of bones breaking all over my body. Lying on the ground, I moved only my eyes, trying to assess the situation. What happened? The spear had grazed past the Imperial Guard's head. It had missed it. My interference had helped, it seemed. Crack! Crack! The helmet clutched in the Imperial Guard's grip was crushed, almost reduced to half its size. From the gaps in the helmet, red blood was trickling down. Victory was within the Imperial Guard's grasp. Freeing! The light around the paladin's armor was fading, but in exchange, the glow of force in his left hand grew even stronger. The paladin extended his light-wrapped hand toward the side of the Imperial Guard's head. The Imperial Guard tried to tilt his head back to dodge, but the explosion was faster. Boom! A force explosion at point-blank range. The impact was so immense that even the paladin was caught in it. It was, quite literally, a move of mutual destruction. The ground trembled as dust and smoke billowed upward. Clang! Clang! Before the smoke had even settled, I heard the sound of metal colliding and crumpling. Ah! As the echoes of the explosion faded, everything came into sharp focus. I opened my blood-filled mouth, stunned at the strange scene before me. The paladin's left arm had been consumed in his own explosion, vaporized all the way to the shoulder. Then my gaze fixed on the Imperial Guard. At first, I didn't immediately understand what I was seeing. Crack, crunch. The Imperial Guard had mounted the paladin, mercilessly pummeling his helmet with his fists. The crushed helmet had flattened, resembling a tray. Broken skull fragments and flesh smeared the Imperial Guard's fists, turning to a mushy pulp. It wasn't the brutality of the scene that shocked me. The reason I couldn't look away lay elsewhere. The Imperial Guard has no head? The Imperial Guard's head had been blown away in the force explosion, leaving only part of his neck and lower jaw. His final biological component, the brain, was gone. In other words, the Imperial Guard was biologically dead, and yet Legion was still moving. Whoo! The Imperial Guard let out a roar of victory. A hollow cry resounded, reverberating through his throat. Even without a brain, the Imperial Guard did not cease his struggle. Screech! The Imperial Guard rose to his feet. Cybernetic prosthetics often continue to move through residual signals, even after losing their brain. But this Imperial Guard was not moving through residual signals. Creak, creak. The Legion full-body mechanical armor walked forward. With no human brain to control it, the movement of its limbs was awkward. Yet it was clearly driven by some kind of will. I felt a visceral sense of repulsion. Looking at that sight, an unbearable loathing stirred within me. It felt as if the human mind wasn't the master controlling the mechanical body, but rather just another part, a mere component of the machine. The Imperial Guard stood over my fallen head, reaching out his hand as if to lift me up. He didn't seem to know that he was already dead. If ghosts exist, would they look like this? I didn't take the Imperial Guard's hand. Instead, I spoke words that I probably shouldn't have. Are you really still alive, even in that state? The Imperial Guard flinched. He raised a hand, as if trying to feel his own head. Swish, swish. His hand swept through empty air. Only then did he seem to realize that his head was gone. He continued to swipe at the place where his head used to be, then let out a scream. Woo! The hollow sound that escaped his throat was hoarse, the voice lost along with his vocal cords. Lud! The Imperial Guard knelt down and collapsed beside my head. He had lost the final piece of his natural body. The moment he became aware of that, he met his complete death. All signals from the computational device that had been assisting his prosthetic movement ceased. I single quotes v.bin. Lying there, I looked up at the headless Imperial Guard. Striving to become a monster like this, all this time? Undergoing full-body mechanization, eventually being granted Legion. The symbol of the Imperial Guard, it had been my only goal in life. But for the first time, a different thought surfaced. Legion might not be liberation from a weak body, it might be a prison for the mind. How dangerous, Luca. I lay sprawled on my back, staring up at the night sky. Beyond the shoulder of the fallen Imperial Guard, stars were sparkling. It was the first time I'd ever seen such a clear night sky, a sight I could never see from the Empire's capital, Akbaran. Stars in the night sky. They're beautiful. Perhaps this scene would be the final image of my life. I've been shivering for a while now. The thrill of battle had faded, leaving only the crushing weight of pain and death pressing in on me. Ah, damn it. Only then did I notice that my side had been torn open in a long gash. Blood was streaming out in torrents. If I wasn't careful, my insides would spill out, offering an unpleasant view. I wasn't in any shape to get up and move on my own. With my mangled hand, I tried to press against the torn wound on my side. Creak, creak. My tattered fingers were malfunctioning. It only seemed to be worsening the tear. Forget it, damn it. I blinked. Whether the first died or not, the stars continued to shine brightly. Beyond that sea of stars lay Earth, the place where our ancestors once lived. Step, step. Footsteps echoed. I raised my head slightly, gazing ahead. I wasn't the only survivor. I forced a faint smile. You're alive, Luca. I lay, missing an arm, staggered toward me. The others? I asked, and Ile slowly shook his head. They've all been cut in half, whether sideways or up and down. It looked like the paladin's sword aura had hit its mark. Only Ile and I survived. Ile stood beside my head, kneeling. He stared silently at the dead Imperial Guard, then pushed the body back, letting it fall. Luca, you're badly wounded. If this goes on, you'll die. I know, even if you don't say it. Ile checked over my condition, but his expression was odd. His gaze kept glancing eastward, over and over. Yes, Ile Karthika. Your heart's set in that direction, isn't it? Now's a good chance. An official missing in action during a mission, it's a clean wrap-up. It wouldn't be strange if a single body wasn't found. Luca, Ile squeezed his eyes shut, then opened them. He turned his head, looking toward the east. I understood the meaning of that gaze. Our empire lay to the west. To the east was the territory of Kurite and Balado. Ile had always wanted to leave the empire. Even if he never directly said it, I could tell. If you're going to go, go now. Don't think about trying to heal me. The follow-up unit will be here soon. I lay there, watching Ile. He looked at me with a distant gaze, then turned his eyes away. Step. Ile walked past me. His footsteps grew fainter as he moved away. I couldn't understand Ile's thoughts or actions. He had both the talent and background that anyone in the empire would envy. His life was practically guaranteed to be one of success. And yet, Ile was abandoning it all to leave the empire. No matter how hard I try, I just can't understand you, Ile. But I could respect it. I wanted Ile to live as he wished. If I was lucky, maybe I'd hold out until the follow-up unit arrived. If not, then it's the afterlife for me. I took a slow, steady breath. I closed my eyes, then opened them, staring at the stars. It wasn't a terrible feeling. Step, step. The footsteps, which had faded, began to grow closer again. I let out a laugh, mixed with a sigh. Laughing hurts. What are you doing, you idiot? I looked at Ile, who had returned. He knelt down, pressed one hand against the bleeding wound on my side, and began administering first aid. Maybe I really am an idiot, just like you said. Ile smiled wryly as he spoke. Once I was taken back to the Empire. I was summoned from place to place as soon as I recovered. It seemed this relic site mission had become a major issue for the higher-ups. Even senior officials, whose titles alone gave me a headache, came to hear my report. They discussed complex political matters in front of me, speculating about potential diplomatic friction with the Holy Kurite Alliance. An Imperial Guard had died, and 3 cadets had lost their lives. But that wasn't why this was causing such a fuss. Imperial soldiers dying was an everyday occurrence. I was flipping through a catalog of cybernetic products. What I had now were temporary prosthetic arms and legs, which allowed only basic functionality for daily life. The lack of power energy output for combat left me feeling like I was shackled, with a heavy sense of restriction on my limbs. They found an artifact at the site we visited. There's a lot of debate over who owns it, Ile said. True to his background in a renowned household, he was well informed on matters like these. It seemed he picked up a lot from here and there. An arcane artifact. I remembered the cube spinning in the center of the site. I'd suspected it was no ordinary object, but I hadn't realized it was an artifact. Have they recovered it? They're forming a recovery team made up of experts. For now, the Imperial Guard is protecting the site. It's worth it. Some artifacts can serve as strategic resources for the nation. Ile went on talking about the artifact. Apologies, but since I wasn't interested, I let most of it slip by, only half listening. If the Holy Alliance doesn't let go of this historic site and artifact, a fairly large battle could break out. It won't escalate into an all-out war, though. All-out war was something every nation sought to avoid. The Akrisha Empire, the Holy Kurite Alliance, the Balado Federation. If any 2 of these countries engaged in all-out war, the remaining one would reap considerable benefits. For that reason, each nation continued to wage limited conflicts, containing the losses to manageable levels. It wasn't something that mattered much to me. Well, it mattered in some sense, but I wasn't interested. In the end, it was just work for the high-ranking officials involved in politics. All I had to do was fight when ordered. That's what it meant to be a soldier, a member of the Imperial Guard. The Imperial Guard. I recalled the Imperial Guard who had met his end at the relic site. Even after his head had been blown off, he'd moved like a ghost, a phantom effect caused by residual signals. The Imperial Guard captain had dismissed it with that explanation, after hearing my report. A predictable answer, and not the answer I wanted. He listened to my words and responded even after death. It wasn't just some phantom effect. The questions remained unresolved, lingering in my heart. But I wasn't foolish enough to delve into what the higher-ups wouldn't answer. I found myself lost in thought, unable to turn even a single page of the catalog. Luca, for the prosthetic arm, I would recommend the F20 for reuse model. The adjustment period is short, so you'll be back in action sooner, and its performance is even better than the one you had before. Ile leaned in beside me, pointing at the catalog. I glanced at Ile. He looked calm. He hadn't run from the Empire. Instead, he'd chosen to save me. Ile, I have no regrets. Because, to me, you're worth it. Ile, catching the meaning in my words, replied. I didn't say anything further. It was around the time I'd gotten used to my new prosthetic arm and leg. I stepped into an unfamiliar room. The space was unusually bright for a cadet training facility. The walls were a warm shade of white, and a few potted plants were scattered along the shelves. Thanks to the sunlight streaming through the windows, the room was bright even without lights. A visitation room. It was a place where cadets could meet with acquaintances or family members. As someone from an orphanage, it was a place that had no connection to me whatsoever. Well, I scratched my neck, staring forward. I didn't know what I was supposed to say. Sitting in front of me was a girl who'd come to see me. I already knew who my visitor was. Lillian Reimagining. She was the younger sister of Claude Reimagining, who had recently died. Lillian was still dressed in black mourning clothes. When she noticed my presence, she stood up. Her half-lidded eyes gave her a languid appearance. This isn't our first meeting, is it? Lillian spoke carefully. I nodded and took a seat in front of her. We saw each other at Claude's funeral. I felt uncomfortable in many ways. After all, I had been the captain on the mission in which Claude died. It would be proper for me to accept whatever accusations she has. I mentally prepared myself and waited for Lillian to speak. She simply looked at me in silence. Claude spoke a lot about you, Luca. It was an unexpected comment. Tilting my head slightly, I expressed my curiosity. About me. He said he had a capable friend among his peers. He even asked me if I'd consider meeting you. Claude had tried to set me up with Lillian. It seemed he'd already mentioned me to her on multiple occasions. Are you aware of my background? That's why it's actually better. I was even more puzzled. As Lillian Reimagining, she could likely marry a young man from a family far more prestigious. In this vast empire, there were certainly people with a stronger background and more ability than me. Better, you say? It means fewer unnecessary steps between us. How about you? Lillian leaned forward, propping her chin up with both hands. Her direct approach only made me more uneasy. I would have preferred the straightforward chaos of a battlefield filled with whizzing bullets. I don't know much about you, Lillian. This was the most polite rejection I could muster. Engaging in this kind of conversation, which didn't suit me, was already making my tongue itch. We could get to know each other from now on, couldn't we? I don't know much about you either. This woman wasn't easy. Despite her relaxed expression, she was relentless. If I tried to shake her off too harshly, it felt like I'd be leaving part of myself behind with her. I need a bit of time to think about it. I think it's a good opportunity for you as well. Others would be envious, you know. I flinched. Conditions that others would envy. On reflection, there was nothing wrong with what Lillian said. This was a chance to be connected with a woman from a distinguished family. If I wanted to rise higher, I would need connections and family influence. Lillian could provide that for me. Ideal. For a man in my position, a woman like Lillian would be desirable. But it was what others would want, not what I wanted. Suddenly, I thought of Ile Karthika. Despite having all the privileges that others envied, he wanted to escape the Empire. I'd always thought it was an incredibly foolish thing to do. So this is what it was. Turning down Lillian's proposal would be just as foolish. But right now, I wanted to do exactly that. Luca. Lillian tilted her head, looking at me. I gave my answer. I refuse. I kept it brief, without any flowery language. For the first time, a flicker appeared in Lillian's eyes. She was probably running through 1,000 thoughts in her mind. Lord, I rose from my seat. Even if Lillian felt insulted, I couldn't help it. If I tried to decline politely, I had a feeling she'd cling to me to the end. Clasp. Lillian grabbed my wrist in a firm grip, stronger than I'd expected. I must have been rushing things, Luca. No, that's not. She cut me off, smiling. Let's start as friends. I'll come see you again. She released my wrist and spoke, then walked out of the visitation room before I could respond, showing me her back. Not easy, I murmured to myself. She was a difficult woman in more ways than one. I went to find Kinyuan, the hand-to-hand combat instructor. It wasn't unusual for cadets to visit instructors for personal reasons, especially by the third year. After completing basic training, cadets would identify areas where they needed improvement and build their own training curriculum. It's unusual for you to come looking for me. Kinyuan, seated inside his office, looked at me as he spoke. Like the other instructors, he was a retired member of the Imperial Guard. I came because I had something to ask. Have a seat. Would you care for some tea? Kinyuan rose from his seat, his loose clothing fluttering as he moved. Before I could even answer, he was already pouring tea. Thank you. I accepted the tea and took a seat. SIP. The tea was bitter and astringent. I barely managed to keep a neutral expression. If he weren't my superior, I'd have cursed and asked if he seriously paid money to drink this garbage. Kinyuan inhaled the steam from the hot tea and carefully took a small sip. He looked serene, savoring the tea with a sense of leisure. I observed Kinyuan. He had a middle-aged face, calm to the point that he didn't even give off a military vibe at a glance. But Kinyuan was strong. I'd felt that difference when learning hand-to-hand combat under him. He was different. If it's hand-to-hand combat, there's nothing more for you to learn. You're already excellent. Even among past cadets, few were more skilled in combat than you. Interpreted another way, it meant that there were still those better than me. Being excellence at the cadet level isn't enough. There was no point in dragging this out. I got straight to the point. There's no need to be greedy. I could barely sit back and watch as the Imperial Guard and the Holy Krait Alliance's paladin fought. Well, of course. Isn't that because you're still a cadet? I read the reports and records myself. You carried out your role admirably, using your abilities to the fullest. Kinyuan chuckled slightly. Strictly speaking, I failed the mission. My fellow cadets, including Claude, had died under my command. If it hadn't been for the intervention of the Imperial Guard, we would have been annihilated. You were up against an opponent you couldn't defeat, even at full strength. It wasn't your fault. That was a failure of the upper ranks. In fact, your evaluation has only risen since that mission. The upper ranks evaluation doesn't matter. I need the capability to respond, even when faced with an unexpected adversary. Kinyuan closed his mouth and narrowed his eyes. I raised my head, waiting for Kinyuan to speak. Time is on your side. You'll gain more experience and receive better prosthetics in the future. You'll grow stronger even without rushing. The upper ranks, having lost cadets due to this miscalculation, will also proceed with more caution. Kinyuan spoke gently, as if instructing me. I held my neck and back upright, meeting his gaze steadily. I heard that you, instructor, are also from a two-digit orphanage. Kinyuan was like me, a fellow irregular who had risen from the bottom. The difference in quality between single-digit orphanages and two-digit ones was stark. Orphanages from no one to no 9 housed children with superior genetics. Rumor had it that many of them were illegitimate offspring of noble families. They received ample support from the Empire. Kinyuan and I were from two-digit orphanages, where potential talent was low, and the Empire's support was scarce. Yet, a few exceptional individuals managed to rise despite from such harsh conditions. The Empire is fair. It gives everyone a chance. People thought this way. I had thought so, too. However, according to Ile, the Empire had merely used irregulars to plant that illusion among its subjects. It was a subversive thought. I shouldn't dwell on it any further. Swallowing hard, I focused on Kinyuan's words. Luca, you have greater potential than I did. During my cadet days, I barely avoided last place in most of the training exercises. My peers whispered behind my back, saying someone unfit to be an Imperial Guard had slipped through. His words surprised me. Becoming an instructor was a high honor. Only those with distinguished achievements in the Imperial Guard could be granted such a position. It was hard to believe that Kinyuan had been a poor performer during his cadet days. Of course, that was within the context of cadets. Across the Empire, he must have still been an exceptional talent. It's hard to believe, isn't it? Kinyuan chuckled softly, watching me in silence. I've read your service record, instructor. Especially, Kinyuan had established himself as an indispensable figure in significant battles. During his active service, he had earned countless military honors while serving in the Imperial Guard. After a pause, I continued. I heard that you infiltrated enemy lines and distinguished yourself using a non-combat prosthetic. Kinyuan had once feigned surrender at a front line, where they were locked in a standoff with the Balato Federation for months. The prosthetic he used at the time was a low-power, everyday model unsuitable for combat. The Balato Federation accepted Kinyuan's surrender, seeing him as unarmed. Then, a catastrophe ensued. Kinyuan killed the officer interrogating him, then stormed the meeting room, slaughtering the officers in charge of the battlefield, causing a temporary disruption in the front lines. The Empire seized the opportunity to launch an offensive, forcing the Federation to retreat to its front lines. I don't have the clearance to view the detailed records from that time. I didn't know how Kinyuan managed such a feat. The soldiers of the Bellado Federation weren't fools. Kinyuan must have had something beyond common sense that allowed him to pull it off. You're quite curious. This wasn't a compliment. For an Imperial Guard, or any soldier of the Empire, those words served as a warning. Don't seek knowledge beyond your authority. Hold your position in silence. Be loyal to the Emperor, and protect the citizens of the Empire. I understood this well. Just a year or two ago, I wouldn't have acted this way. I realized faintly, I'm changing. I was gradually deviating from the virtues required of a soldier of the Empire. No matter how I thought about it, it was all because of that damn Ile. He was having a bad influence on me. My apologies, instructor. I was about to stand up. As far as I knew, Kinyuan was the most competent among the instructors, but I had no intention of pestering someone who wasn't convinced. Do you plan to go to every instructor like this? Many will view it unfavorably. Reputation matters as much as skill. I don't intend to flatter others to climb the ranks. I plan to rise by my own strength. I have no background to rely on, after all. Kinyuan quietly observed me, then smiled. He stood up, holding his knees. Follow me, Luca. Kinyuan came to a stop in front of an empty training room. A lens on the doorframe opened, beginning visitor identification. Shortly after, the sound of the lock releasing signaled the door opening. The walls and floor of the training room were all cold metal tiles. With so much empty space, even a breath would likely echo. You've always been an excellent cadet. Kinyuan spoke as he walked to the center of the training room, his hands clasped behind his back as he turned to face me. Thank you, I replied reflexively, especially with your high marks in hand-to-hand combat. It's been a point of pride for me as your instructor. Now, show me what you've learned so far, Luca. I immediately assumed my stance, preparing for battle. There was no reason to hesitate. If this was a test, I had to pass. This was an opportunity to learn from the battle techniques of Kinyuan, who had been through it all. My right mechanical. I analyzed Kinyuan's full-body prosthetic. It was a low-power, everyday model. Other instructors and members of the Imperial Guard used combat-level specifications, even during downtime. If we're just talking about the grip strength of my prosthetic arm, I'm at least 10 times stronger. Overall, my specs were much better. My only disadvantage was that I didn't have a full-body prosthetic, making the durability of my biological parts weaker. I regulated my breathing, gathering my full strength. I wasn't taking this lightly. Even with a low-spec prosthetic, Kinyuan was strong enough to take down a cadet like me with ease. I don't recall ever teaching you to hesitate. Seems you've forgotten the basics. Kinyuan spoke, his hands still clasped behind his back. Then, pardon me, I murmured as I moved forward. Clack. The metallic tiles echoed with a cold sound. The Empire's martial arts prioritized lethality and efficiency. Strikes aimed for vital points with the shortest, quickest motions. Whoosh. I moved with textbook form, springing forward with my body's momentum. My probing punch aimed for Kinyuan's face. Though it was light, a direct hit would likely crush his skull. Swish. Kinyuan smoothly tilted his head to dodge my punch. I hadn't expected such an attack to land on him anyway. Closed the distance with the strike. I extended my other fist, fingers loosely spread to grab hold of Kinyuan at any moment. If any of Kinyuan's limbs got caught in my grasp, I could twist and rip it out at the joint. Tap. Kinyuan lightly tapped the inside of my wrist with the back of his hand, gently pushing it aside. With this simple motion, my body tilted. My arm and torso wobbled, like a train derailing off track. My unsteady foot faltered. I didn't try to steady myself as I fell. Breaking my attack sequence would leave me open to counter. I was already within Kinyuan's strike range. Instead, I pushed harder into the fall, catching myself with one hand on the floor, while swinging my unsteady leg up toward Kinyuan's chin. Even I thought it was a sharp improvisation. I was secretly hopeful that this move would catch Kinyuan off guard. I shifted my gaze to look at Kinyuan. He was smiling. The moment I saw that smile, I was certain that I'd already lost. Kinyuan brushed aside my kick with a downward push of his palm. My body spun through the air like a wheel. Unable to regain control, I fell flat on my back. What on earth? I couldn't hold back the words of amazement that escaped my lips. It was a kind of awe. Kinyuan had only tapped me lightly, but each time he did, my body stumbled and lost its balance. In the end, he deflected my kick, twisting the force of my movement. This wasn't a technique found in the Empire's standard combat manual. At that moment, I was certain I'd made the right choice coming to him. It's a personal form of self-defense. Kinyuan extended a hand to me as I lay on the ground. Is it something I could I started to ask but stopped mid-sentence. Kinyuan's hand was visibly trembling. And it wasn't just his hand, his whole body quivered uncontrollably. A sign of malfunction in his neural functions. There's always a price to pay for shortcuts. Kinyuan gave a bitter smile. Kinyuan, having just sparred with me, sat in a meditative posture to regain his composure. I remained silent, observing him quietly. Kinyuan's combat method. My suspicion was correct. Kinyuan possessed a combat technique that wasn't found in the Empire's official manual. Luca, what did you feel and learn during the sparring just now? Kinyuan asked me, his eyes still closed. It felt like I was under a spell. My body moved out of my control, as if on its own. It hadn't been a pleasant experience. Until now, everything I'd learned had focused entirely on controlling one's own body, whether that body was flesh and blood or a mechanical prosthetic. But after sparring with Kinyuan, it felt as if all the techniques I had learned became meaningless. It's called Archi's Victima. Usually, it's referred to as the Archi's combat method. Kinyuan spoke, narrowing his eyes. The slight trembling of his clasped fingers had ceased. It meant his nervous system stabilization was complete. Archi's Victima. I'd heard of it before. Yet, my curiosity only grew. So, you learned it before you became a cadet. Kinyuan nodded slightly at my words. I became a cadet 3 or 4 years later than most. At that time, the Imperial Guard's attrition rate was severe, so the selection criteria were more relaxed. Listening to Kinyuan, I voiced the question I had organized in my mind. But there's something I don't understand. From what I know, Archi's Victima is a form of self-defense used by street thugs. It's not a proper combat method. I tried to phrase it as tactfully as possible. Frankly, it was the kind of crude technique often used by third-rate fighters. You're right. People think of it as one of those combat methods learned by gangs in the lower sectors. Nowadays, anyway, the lower sectors were poorly policed, forcing people to defend themselves frequently. Combat methods using prosthetics had spread in various forms like a trend, but most were worthless in real combat. There was no way the Archi's combat method, accessible even to back alley gangs, could be as impressive as it was. It was a combat method with significant depth. I think the Archi's combat method you demonstrated could even be adopted as one of the Empire's standard combat methods. I spoke candidly. Kinyuan offered a faint smile. It's true, the higher-ups had considered it. But the Archi's combat method has 3 issues. Kinyuan pointed upwards with his index finger, then held up 3 fingers. He seemed to be waiting for my response. After a moment of thought, I spoke. Is it that it's difficult to master? Even from that brief sparring session, I could sense how difficult it would be to master it. As expected of a prodigy, you're sharp, Luca. And the other 2? One of the remaining 2 was easy to guess. Is the cause of the brain dysfunction you're experiencing due to the Archi's combat method? Instructor. Double quotes. Yes. And as for the last one, it's something you can't understand right now. Kinyuan didn't disclose the final issue. I didn't press him on it, as it wasn't my main concern. If it means I can become stronger, I'm willing to accept that level of risk. Besides, I've heard that one of the side effects of the neurological chemical treatments we received includes brain dysfunction. So, even if the risk increases slightly, I expressed my determination. However, Kinyuan shook his head. That's not for you to decide. You are already the Empire's asset. Do you know how much has been invested in you so far? The cadet training program may seem extremely dangerous and harsh, but it's designed to stay within a level you all can overcome. With death at your side, your senses sharpen. Experiences gained on the edge of life and death aren't superficial, they're etched like a brand. This is why the cadet training maintained a level of danger, where any mistake could lead to fatalities. Then, without outright rejecting it, why did you bring me here? I spoke rather aggressively, glancing at Kinyuan to gauge his reaction. Using and learning the Archi's combat method doesn't immediately lead to dysfunction, but it's just a matter of time, whether sooner or later. You will be the first to feel any abnormalities in your brain. When that time comes, can you swear you'll stop using it? I opened my mouth, almost nodding out of habit, ready to agree. I must not answer falsely. Kinyuan's pupils glinted faintly. He was a senior irregular, decades ahead of me. It would be foolish to underestimate him. For someone with his insight, a cunning lie would be obvious. I had a good sense of how others perceived me, an arrogant, ambitious guy. Had I lacked a bit more talent or gone down the wrong path, I'd have ended up as gutter trash, dead in some back alley of the lower sector. I can't swear to it, but I will try my best. This was the best answer I could give. Come find me here at this time starting tomorrow. Fortunately, it seemed I'd answered correctly. Kinyuan patted my shoulder. I nodded, intending to express my gratitude. Wish. My vision spun in an instant. Somehow, Kinyuan had hooked his foot around my leg. No matter how strong one's energy output was, it was useless if one's feet were lifted off the ground. I've been caught off guard again. After knocked me down, Kinyuan passed by my head and spoke. Luca, always prepare for an attack in front of me. Keep your senses expanded at all times. Yes, sir, I replied from where I lay. Hey, are you getting any proper sleep? Ile, who had just returned from a mission, spoke to me. It was the first time I'd seen him in half a month. Ile was definitely perceptive. Recently, I've been cutting back on sleep. Not just for a day or two, I'd been sleeping less for nearly 2 weeks. It was all because of Kinyuan's training. My condition was bound to be poor in every way. I've just got a lot going on. Anyway, how did your mission go? I shifted the topic. Ile shrugged his shoulders. It was boring, just taking care of a malfunctioning android. Every mission they send us on lately is like this. Feels like child's play. It's probably because of that last reconnaissance of the ruins. Even the higher-ups are being cautious. Don't you think that's also why the commander's been absent recently? The Imperial Guard commander, Hemelas, used to occasionally show his face at the training grounds. But now, it seemed like it had been over 3 months since we'd last seen him. Ile held his tongue for a moment, then shook his head. No, that's not it. There must be something else going on. I've picked up a few things through my family's contact network. The Karthika family, Ile's family, had many high-ranking military officers. Anything significant would surely reach the Karthika family's ears. If it's something serious enough for the commander to get involved, could it be a rebellion or something? I joked. In truth, it was an extremely dangerous remark, but around Ile, reckless comments often slipped out. Well, Ile couldn't answer immediately and swallowed his words. I widened my eyes, studying his face. He was unusually flustered. Is it for real? Ile nodded reluctantly. It's not confirmed yet, but they say there's a faction plotting rebellion. Once the investigation concludes, a purge will probably begin soon. Even I was at a loss for words. Just the term rebellion was sacrilegious. If there was indeed such a movement, it wasn't something to speak of lightly. A rebellion. From my perspective, it made no sense. Beyond our borders lay clear enemy nations. Tensions remained high, and full-scale war could break out at any time. The Empire needed an iron-willed emperor and a united army. What nonsense. Are they planning to start a rebellion with the enemy right in front of us? I spat the words out, laced with anger and contempt. No matter how radical Ile's thinking might be, I expected him to agree with this. But I was wrong. Ile, lost in thought, spoke cautiously. If you dismiss it as mere nonsense, it'll only fester from within. Before he could finish, my hand moved. I grabbed him by the collar without even realizing it. Ile, I can tolerate you being the Empire's black sheep, but if you're an enemy of the Empire, even I won't just stand by. That's my line in the sand. I owe my loyalty to the Empire. To my surprise, such loyal words had come out of my mouth. I hadn't known I could say something like that. Ile, with his collar in my grip, looked at me intently without a trace of shock. He observed me, his eyes half closed. His gaze was piercingly cold. Calm down. I'm someone who passed the Imperial Guard's aptitude tests. Do you think I'd become an enemy of the Empire? Ile tapped my wrist lightly as he spoke, regaining my composure. I let go of his collar. So don't say things that could be misunderstood. I don't want to see your name on a list of traitors. I know. I only say this because I can. In front of you. Ile adjusted his disheveled clothes and laughed. Don't laugh. It's annoying. I nudged him with my shoulder and walked toward the vending machine. Ile, following me, had the nerve to ask me to get one for him too. By the way, I heard Claude's younger sister came looking for you. I know Lillian too. She's actually pretty. She was a strange woman. I cut him off firmly. If she's showing interest in you, you might as well make something of it. She's a lady from the Raminus family, after all. A chance for advancement. Annoyed, I tossed the newly vended drink to Ile. No thanks. I'm not interested in climbing up by clinging to some woman. I've rejected all her requests for visits since then. I have no desire to be toyed with by a rich girl's curiosity. Well, but still, I told you, I'm not interested. Ailey was oddly persistent. I made it clear that I didn't want to discuss this topic. Ignoring him, I turned back to the vending machine to select a drink. Tap tap. Ailey, sipping his drink, tapped me on the shoulder. He pointed his finger toward the direction of the visitor's room. I followed his finger with my gaze. Beyond the window of the visitor's room, a familiar face was watching me. Lillian Raymanis. Lillian was inside the visitor's room. Even a noble lady wouldn't be able to enter a military facility without permission. The cadet visitor's room was, without a doubt, a part of the military facility. It wasn't hard to guess who had let Lillian in. I frowned and looked at Ailey. Damn it. Ailey shrugged awkwardly, hearing my muttered curse. Sorry, Luca. Lillian asked me earnestly. The Raymanis family and mine have had ties for a long time, so it was hard to refuse. Ailey and I entered the visitation room. Lillian Raymanis was dressed in a black dress adorned with violet embroidery. As soon as she saw me, she spat out her words, laced with thorns. Luca, why have you been avoiding me? It seemed her pride had been hurt. After all, she'd likely never experienced rejection from anyone in her life. Because I'm not interested, I replied coldly, not even bothering to take a seat. I planned to draw a line before this became even more troublesome. Luca, still. Ailey tried to mediate with a smile on his face. I didn't even look at him. Ailey, shut up. This situation alone is more than annoying enough. At my words, Lillian's eyes went wide with surprise. The Karthika family ranks higher than the Raymanis family. I'd just spoken harshly to the young master of the esteemed Karthika family. It was undoubtedly an unconventional scene. Did I do something wrong to you? Or is there something about me that you dislike? Lillian rose from her seat and approached me. I don't have the luxury to spend time on women. As you know, I'm from an orphanage. Unlike you, if I slip up even once, I'll never get another chance to rise. Then, wouldn't it be all the better to get close to me? It seems you don't understand me, Lillian Raymanis. If I rely on you to succeed and rise up, then everything I've built could collapse on a whim of yours. But a tower built with one's own strength doesn't fall so easily. So, you're saying you're close to Ailey Karthika, but won't benefit from a noble family's advantages? That's contradictory. Lillian glanced briefly at Ailey as she spoke. She might think that way, but it wasn't something to say in front of him. Ailey looked troubled. She must have assumed he was a pushover. Then again, he wasn't the type to be harsh with a girl practically a little sister to him. My relationship with Ailey isn't because he's from the Karthika family. He's someone I trust with my life, my comrade and friend. I'm sure Ailey feels the same. In battle, what protects us isn't family prestige or fame. It's only the comrade standing beside us. I said without even glancing in Ailey's direction. I didn't want to see his smug grin. Lillian was at a loss for words, her face frozen in frustration. If she ended up cursing at me and stormed out, it would probably bring me some peace. I braced myself, suppressing my combat reflexes, ready even for a slap. You truly have no intention of giving me even the slightest chance, do you? Lillian spoke, as though struggling to hold back her emotions. She looked up at me, then lowered her head. I felt a small pang of guilt. Still, I didn't want to leave any room for misunderstanding. If there's nothing more to say, I'll be going. With that, I turned my back and walked out of the visitation room. Ailey didn't follow me instead. He stayed behind to speak with Lillian. This was likely an uncomfortable situation for Ailey, who had served as a mediator, but he had brought this upon himself. I sat down on a bench away from the visitation room and waited for Ailey. Before long, he came out and dropped down beside me. Luca, what? You went too far just now. There was no need to be that cold. Ailey sighed. He seemed worn out from trying to placate Lillian. If I hadn't gone that far, she wouldn't have backed off. Well, maybe so. But why are you so adamant about rejecting Lillian? You could at least try seeing her casually. I couldn't respond immediately. Even I couldn't pinpoint the exact reason. It was purely instinctual. I simply felt that rejecting her was the right decision. I traced back through my thoughts. To me, Lillian was an unknown entity. I can't understand why she's clinging to me. I get why the late Claude tried to introduce her to me. He saw potential in me and wanted to link me to his family. But Lillian doesn't know me well. Even so, she's trying to get close to someone like me, who has nothing to offer. There must be some reason for it. If that reason was mere curiosity, then I had all the more reason to keep her at a distance. Curiosity is a fleeting emotion. Even children in the slums, once they tire of a toy, toss it into the trash without a second thought. So, in short, you're rejecting her because you don't know her well enough. At this rate, you'll end up a lifelong loner. Aile teased provocatively. I almost snapped back but stopped myself. I didn't know anything about Lillian. I couldn't understand why she wanted to approach me. Her identity and motives were completely unknown. No matter what you say, my decision remains the same. Don't bring up Lillian again. The unknown is dangerous. I had no desire to be the first to eat a strange fruit without knowing whether it was poisonous. It had been about a month since I began learning Arki's combat method under Kinyuan. Kinyuan took me with him to the lower sector. We rode the elevator down and passed through the checkpoint that served as the boundary between the upper and lower sector. This place is familiar to both you and me. Kinyuan spoke as we entered the lower sector. The upper sector was located at the city's center, while the lower sector lay outside. The further out we went, the more law enforcement diminished to the point of near absence, and the streets were filthy with decades of uncollected trash. To be honest, I had forgotten my roots, the sticky, sordid life at the very bottom. Returning here felt strange. Move it, damn it. You're the one who was standing around like an idiot, you punk. Harsh voices echoed through the street. As we walked along the main road, I saw two fights between vagrants and nearly fell victim to pickpockets for times. The air choking and lukewarm. Old memories kept resurfacing. My mind drifted back into the past. Underneath the capital Akbaran lay a lava field. Geothermal energy drawn from there powered the entire city. Unfiltered wastes and heat from the power plants is released in the lower sector, where the poor lived. Luca, this way. Kinyuan, with his hood pulled low, looked back at me. He pointed to a narrow alleyway. He knows the geography of the lower sector better than I do. He must have frequented this area. Despite being originally from the lower sector, he'd spent decades as an Imperial Guard. Why would someone in his position be so knowledgeable and come here so often? The question lingered in my mind. Step. As I walked through the alley, I remained on high alert. I could feel the eyes of vagrants and beggars on me, ready to turn into robbers if I showed any weakness. The alleyway, snaking between illegally expanded buildings, felt like a maze. Only a few faint beams of light managed to reach the ground, threading through like needles. The deeper we went, the sharper the stench of rotting organic matter and rusted metal pierced my nose. Uneasy, I lifted my arm, looking at the prosthetic hand, bare of even synthetic skin. The prosthetic arm and leg I had equipped had low energy output, only suitable for daily activities. The sense of limitation was unsettling. It felt like shackles on my limbs. Kinyuan had insisted I wear prosthetics with low energy output for this trip. I didn't know his purpose, but if I wanted to continue training under him, I had to follow his instructions. With this body, I can't even dodge a bullet. If someone ambushed me from beyond my senses, I'd be helpless. Because of that, I was more tense than usual. I don't feel like I've learned much under Kinyuan so far. For the past month, I've been practically visiting Kinyuan every day. Each time, we'd spar 5 times within roughly an hour. There wasn't much instruction. Kinyuan wanted me to figure things out for myself rather than teaching me directly. If you can't pick it up just by watching, then no amount of teaching will help you learn. Perhaps sensing my frustration, Kinyuan had said this, and he wasn't wrong. By now, I'd managed to grasp the essence of Arki's combat method. Arki's combat method was distinctly different from any combat style I had learned so far. As far as I understood, Arki's Victima was about repurposing the combat skills I already possessed. Most combat training involves learning specific new methods and mastering them, but Arki's combat method analyzes, dismantles, and reassembles my existing abilities. In other words, it was more of an optimization of my combat method. To borrow Kinyuan's words, he even used the term superior combat algorithm. That's why so many half-baked fighters pick up a few superficial aspects and start parading around like they're masters of Arki's combat method. True users of Arki's combat method were exceedingly rare. At some point, the narrow alley began to open up. With the growing crowd, the atmosphere became livelier. I thought that once I became a cadet in the Imperial Guard, I'd never have to come back to the lower sector. I wanted a life where I wouldn't have to breathe this kind of filthy air again. I said this as I kicked away a pickpocket reaching for my pocket. He cursed under his breath and vanished. That made 5 now. You're the type to succeed. You're persistent and have the talent to match. Whether that was praise or sarcasm, I couldn't tell. A little further, the alley came to an end, and a large open square with a market emerged. Looking up, I could see precariously constructed buildings with extensions that spread out like branches, tangled like a spider's web to obscure the sky. Underneath these structures, ready to collapse at any moment, people were buying and selling goods. The black market, I said as I stood beside Kinyuan. I hadn't come this far before either. It's the freest place in the empire. Kinyuan spoke, his eyes gleaming. The heart of chaotic disorder. I replied with a grumble. The reason I'd never been to the black market was simple. Because it's recklessly dangerous. More than a few kids had vanished after coming to the black market out of curiosity. Even if they returned, they were often missing an eye or an organ or two. Well, seeing the black market that I had only imagined in my childhood felt strangely surreal. Though these are items from several generations ago, they're openly selling military goods. Military weapons and prosthetics were brazenly displayed for sale on the stalls. The shop owners were all armed, and gangs patrolled the streets in place of law enforcement, wandering around as if marking their territory. I halted. Kinyuan, who was walking ahead, had stopped. He was looking at a building guarded by a gang member. The entrance for spectators is over there. The gang member standing guard said to Kinyuan. Instead of eyes, he had a single visor-style goggle implant, and circuits glowed under his artificial skin like decorative tattoos. I have business with the supervisor of this establishment. Kinyuan spoke calmly. His confident demeanor made the gang member hesitate. What's your connection to Brother Aleph? Ah, so the supervisor's name is Aleph, is it? The gang member scowled as soon as Kinyuan said this. This crazy bastard. Get lost right now. The gang member threatened Kinyuan, raising his gun at him. Quite the sight. How many people in the Empire had dared to aim a gun at an Imperial guard and lived to tell the tale? If Kinyuan revealed his identity here, this thug would likely wet himself and collapse. Tap. Kinyuan tapped his thigh with his finger. A signal meant for me. Swish. I lowered my stance, moving carefully out of the gang member's line of sight. And then, in a single swift motion, crack, I closed in on the gang member's side, wrapping my arm around his neck and shoulder, locking him in a chokehold. As his gun barrel tilted upward, Kinyuan moved safely out of its line of fire. The gang member trembled in my hold. With my arm locking his joints, breaking free through sheer strength would be difficult. Kinyuan took the gun from the gang member's hand and casually inspected it. Soon, the barrel of the gun was aimed at the thug's forehead. I suggest you bring Aleph here right now. It won't end badly for you either. If you understand, nod. The gang member quickly nodded. I caught Kinyuan's signal and released my hold. Ugh, you. Swallowing his curses, the gang member went inside the building. I watched him go, then voiced my question. By the way, what kind of place is this? It's the Colosseum. I fell silent, almost as if I were broken. I had a feeling I knew why Kinyuan had brought me here, and why he had insisted I come with weakened limbs. Is it what I think it is? That's what I like about you, you're sharp. No need to spell everything out. I suppressed the urge to punch Kinyuan in the face and sighed. Click. I looked down at my hand. I could feel the weakness in my grip. I'd have to fight in the Colosseum with this hand that couldn't even crush a stone. Just the thought made me sigh. The Colosseum manager, Aleph, was a sleek-looking man. He sat in a tattered, split-leather chair, puffing on a cigarette. Behind him stood two gang members armed with guns. Aleph motioned with his chin, acknowledging Kinyuan and me. Send this guy into the match. No match fee, and I don't care if he dies while fighting. Kinyuan cut straight to the point. Aleph raised an eyebrow, flicking his cigarette butt at Kinyuan. Whoosh. I reached out and knocked away the cigarette butt. It seems you're mistaken. We didn't let you in to entertain your requests. We brought you to a place where it's easier to clean up a corpse. Aleph shrugged, laughing. The gang members behind him laughed as well, fingers on their triggers. Where's the previous guy? Tora, I mean. At the mention of Tora's name, Aleph flinched. He's dead. Got caught fixing fights. As the two talked, I assessed the atmosphere. Aleph's words were a kind of bluff. If they really intended to kill us, they would have attacked already. He was willing to negotiate and talk. I focused, tuning into the sounds of anyone nearby. There are two more armed gang members outside the door. I prepared for things to go south. If I shielded my head and heart with my arms and charged forward, I could probably subdue the gang members in the room. I'd take a few bullets, but it shouldn't be fatal. Then, if things escalated, the two outside would come in. At that point, I'd retaliate using the gun from one of the downed gang members. APM. It'd be best to take one shot before the door opens to check for any aiming deviations. No matter how skilled I was, I couldn't guarantee a headshot on the first try with someone else's gun. Though, I might be able to pull it off. This weak body is such a hassle. If I still had my original prosthetic limbs, I'd be confident I could subdue them without a scratch. Just for the sake of imagining the ideal scenario, first, I'd kick the solid metal desk at the gang members, using it to obscure their view as they went flying. Then, I'd punch right through the metal desk, smashing straight into the gang member's head. The two gang members waiting outside would then burst in through the door. By then, I'd already be gripping a gun, clinging to the doorframe, pressing against the wall or ceiling. Bang bang, 2 shots to the top of their heads, and it'd be over. With point-blank shots, there'd be no need for aim adjustment. While I indulged in this fantasy, Kinyuan continued talking. Tora's not the type to rig a fight. At Kinyuan's words, Olaf scowled. However, he didn't resort to violence. Olaf couldn't easily treat Kinyuan with disdain. There was an undeniable aura around Kinyuan, a sense of danger that emanated from his mannerisms and speech. He had the presence of someone who'd been through it all. Hey, if you're so keen on rambling about some has been, why don't you go across the street? Plenty of women there who'll listen to all sorts of nonsense as long as you're paying credits. That is, despite Olaf's warning, Kinyuan went on with what he wanted to say. The Colosseum's quite a profitable business, isn't it? Looks like you killed Tora to take it over. I'm not here to blame you. After all, Tora got his position by killing his predecessor. That's just the way of the streets. Who the hell are you? Do you have a death wish or something? Who's killing who now? Olaf shot up from his seat, and the gang members behind him raised their guns. Sit down, Olaf, and you all, lower your guns, unless you're keen to join Tora. I don't repeat warnings. I stood expressionlessly at Kinyuan's side. Honestly, deep down, I wanted Olaf to attack Kinyuan. I was intensely curious to see how he'd handle this situation with his weaker prosthetics. Unlike me, he wouldn't rely on some plan that involved getting shot. Damn it. Olaf raised his hand to signal his men to stand down. He sat back down. Olaf was capable enough to hold a certain status in the back alleys. At the very least, he had an instinct for sensing danger. He'd instinctively concluded that crossing Kinyuan was a bad idea. Smart move. Olaf had just saved his life. So, you're serious about sending this guy into the Colosseum as a fighter? Olaf said, sizing me up. I could see his pupils faintly glowing as he analyzed my limbs. You have my word I won't hold you responsible if this boy dies. He was casually waging my life, but I didn't voice any complaint. I was the one who'd asked for this training. Not that it mattered. Kinyuan, as my instructor, already held the right to decide whether I lived or died. Life or death isn't the issue. You can't put on a shoddy match. His limbs aren't even built for combat. His body's still all soft flesh. Once it starts, he'll get smashed to a pulp and sent flying in under a second. You think the audience is going to buy that? A reasonable argument. I had the urge to nod in agreement at his words. I felt I might start liking this man little by little. The Colosseum and the black market was teeming with fools who'd risked their lifespans for illegal modifications. These were people who didn't care about side effects, living only for the day, but in exchange, they'd gained power. Today might very well be the day of my own funeral. I guarantee you, I could shut down your business in a single day. You're welcome to test it out. Pull the trigger if you want. Do I look like I'm asking for a favor? Kinyuan spoke with sheer nerve, his tone rich with years of experience, blending threat with command. If I tried saying the same thing, I'd have bullets flying at me in seconds. Every move Kinyuan makes is calculated from the start. Kinyuan had brought up the previous manager first. Because of this, Olaf assumed that Kinyuan, with his imposing demeanor, must be a big shot. And of course, he's right. Kinyuan is beyond anything you could imagine. The Empire was well aware of the black market's existence. They could sweep in and obliterate it at any time. This place only operated under the Empire's tacit permission. Olaf's hands and feet showed faint tremors, and his pupils were unfocused. He was anxious. He was likely using all his sources to figure out Kinyuan's identity. It was a wasted effort. The information networks in these back alleys would never hold any details on an Imperial Guard. There's much I have to learn from Kinyuan. I observed Kinyuan's demeanor. He dominated his opponent and took control of the situation without resorting to force. I didn't have that kind of command over words. Fine, I'll pair the boy with a suitable opponent at his level. Will that do? But I'll need something in return for my troubles. Aleph opened the way for negotiation. Kinyuan, as if he'd been waiting, dangled a tempting offer. I know where Tora kept his vault. You likely have Tora's eye, which is the key to it, don't you? Aleph was momentarily speechless. His pupils widened with excitement. I'm truly curious about your identity now. How much exactly do you know? Just a ghost from a past you don't need to know about. Kinyuan gave a faint smile. At the mention of Tora's vault, Aleph adjusted his posture, his former arrogance vanishing. Would it be acceptable if I confirmed this information about the vault, sir? His tone had become exceptionally respectful. I struggled to hold back a smile. Kinyuan and Aleph spoke in whispers. Once the confirmation process was complete, Aleph clasped Kinyuan's hands in both of his. Just say the word. If you'd like to watch the match, we have VIP seats, with fine drinks and women, if you'd like. Kinyuan waved off Aleph's flattery. Just the drinks will do. And don't go easy on this one, match him with a top fighter. With that, the conversation was wrapped up in no time. 2 hours from now. Get yourself ready. As soon as we arrived at the Coliseum's waiting room, Kinyuan spoke. He walked over to the camera mounted in the corner and twisted it off. Given Aleph's overly accommodating attitude, he probably wouldn't mind minor property damage like this. Who is Tora? He's an old friend of mine. So Aleph killed your friend, instructor. He deserved to die. He played the role of gang boss in the Coliseum, so it's only natural he'd accumulated some karma. Kinyuan spoke in a detached tone. My guess was that they'd been fairly close. If it were me, no matter the backstory, I'd have beaten Aleph to death on the spot. What's in Tora's vault that made Aleph's attitude change like that? Hidden assets. Judging by his reaction, he's probably been searching for it all along. My first thought was that it was a shame. You should have just beaten him up and taken Tora's eye then and there. That's what I would have done. If a fight had broken out, I might have been fine, but you would have gotten shot. I couldn't deny that. If it had come to a fight, what were you planning to do? I let out the question I'd been holding back. You're really curious about that, huh? Win this fight, and I'll tell you. Kinyuan pointed to a screen on one side of the waiting room. An ancient display, at least several decades old, flickered with a faded image. Gabriel the Steel Fist. On the screen was a hulking fighter with silver, gleaming arms. He was a good 2 heads taller than me. Gabriel's profile also popped up. He stood 2 meters 30 centimeters tall and weighed over 300 kilograms. His nose was crooked in a zigzag, likely broken more than once. His thick lips had been split and healed repeatedly, giving them a grotesquely swollen appearance. His eyes were unusual to each from a different manufacturer, making them mismatched in both size and color. He was a truly hideous-looking guy. Looks like he'd be popular with the ladies. Kinyuan chuckled as he spoke. He wasn't being sarcastic, that was a genuine statement, and I understood exactly what he meant. I was from the lower districts too, after all. A guy who's popular with the ladies around here is one who earns good money and kicks the bucket fast. Remember the advice I'm about to tell you, Luca. It's the most important thing in the Archi's combat method. Kinyuan spoke just before I stepped into the Coliseum. Advice. I stood still in the corridor leading to the Coliseum, waiting for Kinyuan's words. Adapt to what's given. I frowned involuntarily. Adaptation was a word I didn't like. I was taught that adaptation is defeat. Water doesn't lose. It only changes form. You have potential. I noticed from the moment you deflected a bullet without a ballistic trajectory prediction system, and when you came to me on your own, I was genuinely surprised. It was as if someone with the right talents had been drawn here by something. You're giving me praise all of a sudden. Well, it might be your last moment, after all. Kinyuan said it with a fierce smile. I laughed aloud in response. Maybe it was because I was in the lower districts, but I felt more at ease than usual. Kinyuan probably felt the same. After today, I thought I might be able to get closer to Kinyuan, if, as he said, I survived. Step. The Coliseum drew nearer. Aleph's voice boomed through the speakers, challenging Gabriel the Iron Fist in his first match. Could this boy be a David? A mere novice, who's not even lost his innocence. His name is Good Boy. Good Boy clearly made up on the spot. Shaking my head, I entered the Coliseum. Boo-oo. What kind of idiot comes out here? Did you come here to die, moron? What's this? Did they really sell tickets to this match? Complaints filled the Coliseum, but through it, I could faintly hear the delight of their twisted desires seeping into my ears. Oh, we're in for a good show. Is today the day? A slaughter show. It's been ages. Who knew Olaf would put on something like this? The dark desires of people eager to see the blood and guts of others. That kind of anticipation pushed at my back. They were eager to see my limbs ripped apart, my chest and belly crushed. I even spotted some freaks clutching themselves in excitement. Not bad. In fact, it was good. I finally felt like I was back home. I smiled. The name Luca was common in the Empire. Even at the orphanage where I stayed, there were two Lucas. When I was young, they called me Little Luca. Only after I came of age did they start calling me Luca. Around that time, another kid named Luke arrived. They called him Little Luca, just like they once did with me. Old memories came back. Throughout my cadet life, I kept the memories of the orphanage locked away. It was a place I would never return to. I never once ate until I was full. Once or twice a month, an imperial official visited the orphanage. The vehicle would be loaded with supplies, but half of them would disappear the next day. Those diverted supplies ended up scattered across the lower districts. Even when I was starving, I didn't neglect my training. I read whatever dusty books were lying around, untouched, and built my strength by lifting rusty hunks of metal. Are you an idiot? Don't waste your energy. You'll just get hungrier. At first, there were many kids who laughed at me. I smashed my fists into their faces and took their meals. If I wanted to get stronger, I had to eat more than the others. It was better for it to become my flesh and blood than to rot in the stomachs of losers. You think doing this will make you anything? You're just another two-digit like the rest of us. If you were really special, you would have been sent to a single-digit orphanage by now. With a bloody nose, the kid cursed me to the end, sniveling. In the end, I proved them wrong. When I was 12, I went through the second selection exam. My name made it onto the candidate list for the Imperial Guard, and at 15, I officially became a cadet. I am not a loser, and I never will be. Muttering to myself, I opened my eyes. Reality came into view. The Colosseum of the Black Market. My opponent is Gabriel of the Steel Fist. My current prosthetic limbs are low energy output, non-combat models. Conditions couldn't have been worse if I tried. Seems like Olaf overdid it with the drugs today. To be matched with a brat like this, whatever, as long as I get paid. Gabriel was saying this as he strode toward me. I watched him in silence. An asymmetrical, unbalanced modified body. He probably can't even sleep at night without painkillers. Gabriel's prosthetic limbs were all from different manufacturers. It seemed like he'd somehow managed to get them to work together. But it was a temporary solution at best. The oversized arm and fist especially pulled his shoulder forward, making him hunch. His spine was probably just as twisted. The exterior wasn't any better than the interior. His weight distribution was off, causing him to lean as he walked. His skin, stretched to the limit to bear the excessive weight, was torn in places. And where flesh met machine, he suffered from chronic inflammation. But he's strong. He was a man who'd torn his body apart solely to become stronger. Maybe I could have ended up like him. Ha, can't even open your mouth, huh? Are you scared? You've got a pretty face, why not just serve me at night? Gabriel stood before me, waving to the cheering crowd. He skinned my body, then smirked. He'd figured out my limbs weren't combat grade. You're going to need some help, all right. Today, you'll be crippled. Better hope you've got some money saved up. I glanced up at the stands as I spoke. Through the glass-fronted VIP box, I could see Olaf and Kinuan together. Gabriel only raised an eyebrow at my provocation. To him, this was no more than a greeting. Nothing to get upset over. Ha, I'll stomp you down nice and slow until you're begging to serve me. Gabriel stepped back, and I noticed angel wing tattoos on his back. With that hideous look, angel wings were just laughable. I shrugged, taking 5 steps back myself. BZZZZT. On the display wall surrounding the Colosseum, the betting odds flashed. Just as I expected, my odds of winning were set at around 50 to 1. The betting pool was barely balanced. Ladies and gentlemen, here begins the brutal and ruthless world we live in miniature. Will you be trampled underfoot? Or will you rise and trample others? Olaf grabbed the mic and shouted, while Kinuan watched the Colosseum with his arms crossed. Beep. A worn-out buzzer marked the start of the fight. Whew. I steadied my breathing and took a stance, spreading my limbs slightly and facing Gabriel. If I block, I die. The power difference was overwhelming. If his fist hit me, I'd be dead. Gabriel wasn't slow just because of his size, either. Lud. A sound like thunder erupted as he leapt and brought his fist crashing down from above, aiming to flatten me. That's not a trained fighting or combat method. His moves are broad and full of openings. If I had my original prosthetics, Gabriel would be dead in a second. A slight dodge to the side and a quick jab would have made his head burst like a soft fruit. Adapt to what's given. I recalled Kinyuan's instructions. Wishing for what isn't there won't solve anything. No matter how desperately I wish, a gun won't just fall from the sky. I had to face Gabriel with only the strength I currently possessed. No matter how lacking it was, I stepped back. The Colosseum was too narrow to simply retreat. I had to circle around him as well. Crack! The spot where I had just been was smashed in. The sheer destructive force was impressive. Mass and speed don't lie. I trained under Kinyuan for a month. At that time, I hadn't managed to lay a hand on him. He deflected every one of my attacks. Now, I had to recreate that here. Whoosh! Gabriel's fist whistled past me, grazing just in front of my face. The air pressure alone was enough to make me waver. What the hell are you doing? Playing tag? Are you kidding me? If this is it, give us a refund. You think we came here to watch this? The crowd's boos echoed all around. They'd come for violence and bloodshed. I didn't take my eyes off Gabriel. I wasn't here to play circus clown. Whatever those people wanted to see was none of my concern. And I'd just finished my assessment. Seems Kinyuan didn't bring me here to get killed after all. This was the first time I'd fully analyzed someone during a fight. Now, I could see Gabriel's movements ahead of time. He moved exactly as I expected, focused solely on output, ignoring balance. Gabriel couldn't execute complex maneuvers. Looking past his bulk and raw power with a cool head, Gabriel was just a slow-moving cannonball. This is it. With confidence settling in, I allowed myself a smirk. It seemed to rile Gabriel up even more. His swings became wild. An odd exchange ensued. When Gabriel's shoulder twitched, I moved in sync with him. To anyone watching, it would look as if Gabriel had simply missed me. Not that I had dodged his blows. What iron fist are you talking about? Looks like even your brain's rusted through. Just die already, you idiot. Go get your eyes checked if you can't see, moron. What are you doing? The crowd's jeers were now directed at Gabriel. I was able to dodge even before Gabriel threw a punch. In a way, it was only natural. When I pushed my senses to their limit, I could even predict trajectories. A subtle twitch of the shoulder was the trigger. His line of sight was the barrel. Arm length was the effective range. Compared to a gun, his movements had ridiculously long preparation times, limited range, and a blatantly obvious trajectory. Tack! I pushed Gabriel's arm aside, deflecting it. It was exactly what Kinyuan had done to me countless times during our training. If you read and understand the direction of force perfectly, even a small force can deflect a greater one. Stumble! Gabriel's fist, driven by his own momentum, struck the ground, causing him to lurch as if he might topple over. The precarious balance and symmetry of his form were shattered. I could clearly see where to strike to make Gabriel fall. There was no need for overwhelming force. So this is how Kinyuan always saw me. Damn it, no wonder my attacks never reached him. Lud! I kicked Gabriel's knee with the ball of my foot. Under normal circumstances, it wouldn't have worked. My meager strength couldn't bring down Gabriel's solid legs. But with his balance broken, it worked. Crash! Gabriel staggered and dropped to one knee. Confusion flashed across his face as he tried to rise and brace himself. But my follow-up strike came first. Crunch! I struck out again, slamming my knee into Gabriel's face. His right eye shattered. He still had one eye left, but his depth perception would be thrown off. My body flowed around Gabriel like water. He was the one moving and acting, but I was the one in control. In the Colosseum, everything is under my prediction. The space between Gabriel and me was entirely mine. Thanks to the controlled environment of the Colosseum, there were no outside variables or interference. If this were a real battlefield, I wouldn't be able to maintain this level of focus. On a real battlefield, countless variables and interferences exist. But here, in this controlled environment, I could maintain an almost prophetic level of concentration. I couldn't deny it. Kinyuan was an excellent teacher. This should be about enough. I shifted my gaze and backed up against the wall. Gabriel charged at me, thinking he had his chance. Wow! With a roar, Gabriel swung his fist wildly. Propulsion units activated at his elbow, venting gas as he did. It was probably his best move. Whoosh! I dodged it by a hair on purpose, giving him the chance to go all out to the very end. Screech! A metallic tearing noise sounded as Gabriel's fist sank deep into the iron wall behind me. This part was especially rusted and warped. Taking a few steps back, I watched as Gabriel's arm lodged itself in the metal wall, which clung tightly around his fist, trapping it. You rat bastard. Gabriel tried to pull his arm free. His strength was so great that the metal wall creaked, and the connected screws began to shake. I told you, you'd better have a lot of money saved up. I slipped behind Gabriel as I spoke. You damn. Gabriel couldn't finish his sentence. I leapt up, wrapped my legs around his head, and twisted. It was a twisting motion that used the rotation of my entire body. Crack, crack, crack. One by one, his neck bones misaligned with a satisfying sound. I was probably smiling right now. After all, I was a human modified to enjoy combat. Good boy, good boy. The crowd's cheers filled the Colosseum as if they'd tear the place apart. They praised the victor and hurled curses and insults at the defeated. As the tension released, a wave of fatigue swept over me. My mind felt thick and stiff, as if I hadn't slept for days. I waited for the door to the waiting room to open. As soon as the door opened, the medical staff came rushing in. Smiles were plastered across their faces. They were likely planning to squeeze every penny out of Gabriel, whose neck was broken. Well done, good boy. Congratulations on your initiation into Archi's Victima. Kinyuan, who had come down to the waiting room at some point, looked at me as he spoke. I frowned at the phrase good boy, then let out a sigh. It seems that adapting doesn't necessarily mean losing. And take this to cover Gabriel's medical costs. I won some money betting on you. Kinyuan handed me a credit chip. When I saw the amount displayed on the chip, my eyes widened. Even so, Gabriel's probably going to hate me. You'll have to meet him and see for yourself. If there's an opportunity to win someone over, it's best not to create unnecessary enemies. Show just enough kindness not to be underestimated. I want to become a warrior and a soldier, not a saint. Kinyuan placed his hand on my head and whispered, "You're still young when it comes to relationships, Luca. The kindness I'm talking about isn't goodwill, it's an investment. Little by little, you build it up so you can draw on it when you need it. Today, I simply collected my investment in Tora." Kinyuan's smile was chilling. I realized I'd been seriously mistaken about something. I'd subconsciously thought Kinyuan valued my talent and taught me because of that. We shared the same background, which gave me a sense of kinship. What an arrogant thought. One day, my time would come. Too, Kinyuan would collect his investment in me, and probably in a way that I couldn't refuse. Gabriel was in a pitiful state. Lying in bed, he was using his tongue to tap on the display, selecting an artificial spine product from the catalog. If he didn't get proper treatment, he'd be crippled for life. A doctor stood beside the bed. This model has a narrow signal bandwidth, so it won't be compatible with your current cybernetic prosthetic. The one you're using now has such a high energy output. Even if you force the connection, the performance won't be the same as before. There might also be occasional malfunctions or paralysis issues. I recommend Xenix Hyperlindle Model Number 9. The doctor skillfully navigated the catalog, showing an attitude that made it unclear whether he was a doctor or a salesperson. Well, in this field, they were pretty much one and the same. The latest model. How am I supposed to afford that? Are you trying to swindle me? You bastard. I see other guys walking around just fine with cheap stuff. Gabriel shouted in protest. But the doctor didn't even blink. That's because those people didn't modify themselves as excessively as you have. If, at the very least, the arms and legs were from the same manufacturer or were compatible, the signal bandwidth would be consistent, so an older model would have been no problem. At the time, I didn't have any money, so I just attached whatever I could get. In that case, I can purchase your current arms and legs and fit you with others that match the budget. Then, you shouldn't have any mobility issues, even with an older spine. At the very least, for combat use. Gabriel, who was usually so aggressive, was visibly intimidated, and it made sense his fate rested in that doctor's hands. What are you talking about? Forget combat use, I can't even find a second-hand one for daily use. The one you're using has so many modifications that no one would want it even if I sold it as used. You'd only get the value of the parts. For a brief moment, a glint of greed flashed in the doctor's eyes. It was a lie. Do you even know how much this thing cost? Come on, we're the official supplier for the Colosseum, so we're at least doing business transparently. Anywhere else, they'd strip you down to the bone. Even if his aim was to make a profit, his reasoning was painfully true. Better to be scammed by a slightly more honest crook. And then, finally, Gabriel noticed me. His broken eyes filled with a blood-red rage. as if he might weep bloody tears. "You bastard!" Gabriel strained the veins in his neck. It looked like he still had some strength left, even though everything below his neck was paralyzed. "What's the point of shouting when you're a cripple?" I approached Gabriel and tapped his cheek lightly. Crunch. Gabriel tried to bite my fingers. I quickly pulled my hand back, pondering for a moment. Kinyuan told me not to make enemies. It wasn't easy to show kindness to someone radiating hostility. "I'll kill you. I swear, I'll kill you. Stop talking and try it now, if you can." The moment I said it, I realized my mistake. A habitual taunt had slipped out. If I got into a war of words with Gabriel, it would only lead to more insults. Ignoring him, I turned to the doctor. "How much is that Hyperlindel model number 9 you mentioned?" "What?" The doctor tilted his head, looking puzzled. He couldn't grasp my intent, likely unable to imagine that I'd be paying for Gabriel's treatment. No saint would exist in a place like this. I practically shoved the dawdling doctor aside, snatching the catalog display. This should be enough. After confirming the price, I tossed a credit chip onto Gabriel's chest. Gabriel's eyes went wide, glancing repeatedly between the credit chip and me, trying to make sense of it. What's the meaning of this? Are you mocking me? Can't you see? I'm covering your treatment costs. Why would you? Gabriel's pupils wavered. Gone was the fury instead. He trembled, as if afraid I might change my mind. "Remember this debt, Gabriel. I'll come to collect it someday. Whether this would benefit me in the future or not, I couldn't know. But, to borrow Kinyuan's words, I was planting a seed. Are you really a good boy? My name is Luca, idiot. You'd better finalize that payment before I change my mind," I said irritably. Gabriel hurriedly poked at the catalog with his tongue, prodding the doctor to complete the transaction. "Good, Luca." Gabriel looked at me after making the payment. His voice was calm, and his gaze softened. Hesitantly, he continued, "I don't know what led you to do this, but if there's ever a time you need my help, just say the word. I'll help however I can." I stared at Gabriel, then nodded. Not a bad feeling. The experience in the Colosseum had shaken the foundations of my combat skills. It felt as though everything I'd built had been distilled into a single, pure essence. I tossed aside the worn-out prosthetic limbs I used in the Colosseum and heard a welcome sound. The limbs responded as I wanted, with power levels rising and falling as I wished. But now, I don't need to keep the energy output constantly high like before. Even the enemy's strength and the surrounding environment can become my weapons. I would make everything on the battlefield my own. As my perspective widened, I felt more at ease. In the heat of intense exchanges, I could almost see the flow of power as trails and lines. "Ile, today might be a little different," I murmured as I stepped in front of Ile. He was an outstanding student, my rival for the top spot. Even though I might have the upper hand in martial arts, it wasn't to an overwhelming degree. Ile aimed a kick at my head. I deflected and pushed his kick aside. With the direction of force disrupted, Ile lost his balance. I then extended my leg and struck his shin outward. The direction of force leading Ile split. His upper body leaned left, while his lower body leaned right. His attempt to stabilize himself was thrown off, rendering his highly touted, high-powered prosthetics useless. With minimal effort, I completely toppled Ile. "Luca, what the hell did you just do?" Ile looked up at me from the ground, his expression one of disbelief. He'd been caught off guard by my maneuver with almost laughable ease. Just by changing how I use force, it made such a difference. I looked quietly at the palm of my hand, which now held newfound strength. My mind was as clear as if a veil had been lifted. A pleasant chill ran down my spine. I've gained strength without even upgrading to better prosthetics. It would be a lie to say I wasn't exhilarated by my own power. In just over a month, I'd learned and gained this strength under Kinyuan's guidance. My decision was right. Once again, I had proven myself, just as I had back at the orphanage. I learned this from instructor Kinyuan. There was no reason to hide it. It wasn't some great secret. The martial arts instructor. But this doesn't look like any martial arts from the standard manual. Being perceptive himself, Ile caught on quickly. Arki's combat method differed fundamentally from the Empire's standard method. The Empire's combat method was all about overwhelming with strength and speed. It was based on the assumption that I was stronger and faster than my opponent. Hence, it was straightforward and efficient. In favorable terms, it didn't need any tricks. I mentioned the Arki's combat method to Ile. "You're kidding, right?" "Arki's." A predictable reaction came from Ile. The Arky's combat method we knew was the exclusive domain of the gangs in the lower districts. It's true, Arky's. That's just thug street fighting, isn't it? Like grabbing sand and throwing it when you fall, or shoving glass shards between your fingers to stab. The commonly known face of Arky's combat method was just a thin surface. Use the environment and objects around you. Respond flexibly to your enemy. In other words, it's fine to be dirty and underhanded as long as you win. Naturally, the gangs loved it. It's hard for me to believe too. But the one who taught me called it Arky's combat method. So I just have to believe it. Luca, let's go one more time. Ile was unusually fired up with a competitive spirit. Normally, he wasn't all that enthusiastic in training, even putting in moderate effort. He was talented enough to reach nearly the same level as me. In terms of raw talent, he was probably above me. We both got back into position and clashed. VRRRM. I raised my prosthetics energy output to maximum in an instant. Ile was wary of my technique that could disrupt his balance. But this time, I went in with a strong strike. My fist aimed for his side. Just barely, he lowered his elbow to block, and his body lifted slightly off the ground from the impact. Boom. Even in Arky's combat method, it wasn't always about using weaker force to overcome stronger force. That was just one approach. If you could use both techniques of strength and finesse, you alternated between them. Even the hardest metal could crack and break from a sudden change in temperature. Using two extreme methods in tandem could effectively bring an opponent down. Damn this. Ile looked visibly shaken. I could sense his next move by reading his gaze and the preliminary motions of his combat reflexes. Just like when I fought Gabriel, I could anticipate what Ile would do next. It's not that Ile's level is as low as Gabriel's, making him predictable. I simply knew Ile's habits and combat style well, making his next move easy to foresee. With the Empire's standard combat method, the move here would be to preempt Ile, completely blocking his attack. If you were faster and stronger, you could subdue him without giving him any opportunity to strike back. But I lured in Ile's attack and struck back in the opening that followed. Whoosh! As soon as Ile regained his balance, he thrust his right fist forward in a counterattack. I dodged it and swung upward at his elbow from below. When you could read ahead, you could precisely target any weak point. Crack! Ile's elbow joint shattered. I'd broken it cleanly enough that an android repairer should be able to fix it. You've gotten stronger, Luca. Ile, sitting where he'd fallen, spoke as he looked up at me. I reached out to help him up. Unlike usual, he hesitated before grabbing my hand. His reaction was oddly cool. I made a mistake. Seeing Ile's reaction, I recalled the others who had been overtaken by me in the past. Their pride had been crushed right before my eyes. Until now, even though Ile and I had outperformed each other in specific areas, there had never been a stark, one-sided difference. Even though Ile wasn't the type to obsess over physical strength, today, his pride must have taken a serious blow. I got too carried away, acted like a damn kid. When you gain power, you want to use it. Honestly, this urge isn't any different for adults or kids. If I showed any sign of remorse here, it would only further wound Ile's pride. And we weren't the kind of friends bound together by cheap pretense. You sulked because you lost without a chance to fight back? I twisted one side of my lip as I spoke. Yeah, I'm sulked, you bastard. Ile stood up, laughed, and smacked my chest with his elbow. I could feel a bruise blooming in my chest. Oof, looks like he was really upset. I visited Kinyuan for the first time in a while. It was my first visit since going to the Colosseum. Kinyuan was reading a paper book, a rare sight these days. Looks like this new combat method has become second nature to you, Kinyuan said, looking at me. He had closed the book so its cover was hidden. Thanks to what I learned from you, instructor, I've become stronger. I could really tell while sparring with other cadets. That strength was yours from the start. You've only changed how you use it. It's a kind of reallocation and optimization. I looked at Kinyuan, filled with anticipation. My skills had noticeably improved in just a month. I could feel my body itching, heating up. I couldn't wait any longer. I want to move on to the next stage. Do you remember the name of the book I was reading and then closed? Kinyuan asked abruptly. I hesitated before replying. I don't know. I only remembered that the book's color was blue. Kinyuan tapped the table with his fingers upon hearing my answer. A pattern in the shape of a sharp eye appeared as a hologram. In an ancient language, Arky's means sharp eye. Do you know what that means? Insight. My response was swift, as if I'd prepared for it. Kinyuan's eyes widened slightly. as though surprised. It was a simple deduction. The Archi's combat method maximizes insight, allowing one to assess and optimize both the environment and the enemy as well as oneself. Because insight has always been the essence of the Archi's combat method, it's always been both the beginning and the end. I added to my statement. You've understood it perfectly, Luca. Kinyuan had never explicitly spoken about the true nature of the Archi's combat method. He had always referenced it indirectly, through metaphors and actions. Mastering and approaching the Archi's combat method based on only these fragments was the first step, and qualification for learning it. I felt like I had a vague sense of what the next stage of the Archi's combat method would be. Kinyuan's next question followed. Do you remember how many times I tapped the table to activate the hologram? I didn't know this either. I hadn't paid attention. I don't know. At my answer, Kinyuan tapped the table again to turn off the hologram. He closed his eyes slightly and spoke. You keep your terminal in your left inner pocket, and your right leg has a slight synchronization error with your nervous system. You'll need to get that serviced later. When you entered my office, even though you're not left-handed, you opened the door with your left hand. That's because you suddenly boosted the output of your right arm during sparring this morning, so it must still feel numb. I unconsciously brushed my hand over the front of my upper garment. As Kinyuan said, the terminal was in my left pocket, and just as he'd pointed out, my right arm still felt numb from the strain on my nervous system. He's probably right about the right leg synchronization not being perfect either. I hadn't even noticed these imbalances in myself. Most likely, it would have taken a few more days before the errors increased enough for me to realize something was wrong. Kinyuan's observational skill was remarkable. He knew my body better than I did. So this time, it's about maximizing observation. Don't overlook even the smallest details. By gathering minor clues, we can see the outline of the whole picture. Do you remember the question you asked me last time? I knew exactly what he was referring to, and I still hadn't received an answer. You mentioned that even if a fight broke out in Olive's office, you'd be able to get out safely. At that time, armed gang members were stationed both inside and outside Olive's office. We were as good as unarmed, and no matter how skilled we were, it would have been nearly impossible to escape unscathed. When the fight began, I would have lowered myself to avoid the line of fire. I frowned. I didn't find his response convincing. The ones with guns were Olive and the gang members. If your first move was to hide, you'd miss your chance to attack and end up riddled with bullets. You would secure the chance to attack. In that situation, you'd face the gang and Olive head-on, even if it meant taking a bullet or two. Honestly, I didn't like Kinyuan's answer. What I'd wanted was a clever way to turn that situation around. What would you have done if I weren't there? What if I chose to hide or run instead of attacking the gang? If you weren't there, I would have avoided that situation entirely. We would have met in a more crowded place. And the idea of you hiding or running is nonsense. You're a soldier trained to act with a strong, aggressive approach. You don't make self-preservation-driven judgments or take such actions. He was right. I would have subdued Olive and the gang somehow, even if it meant getting hurt. So, in the end, if a fight broke out, I would have been injured one way or another. Kinyuan was assuming my injury as if it were an inevitable outcome. For the first time, I felt a hint of contempt toward him. Luca, you're under a misconception. The Archi's combat method isn't some miracle or magic that defies reality. It doesn't make the impossible possible. I have more experience and a sharper judgment than you. In that situation, it's right for you to play the role of a shield. You likely wouldn't have noticed that Olive's fingers were modified into guns, nor that there was a hidden passage behind the left wall cabinet. Noticing my dissatisfaction, Kinyuan continued to speak. You probably intended to take down the guards first and then deal with Olive as he drew his gun. But if you'd followed that sequence, you'd have taken a bullet to the back of the head. Olive can fire with a simple movement of folding his fingers. By hiding and getting out of the line of fire, I can stop Olive while you subdue the gang. Do you understand now? I couldn't say a word. I hadn't known that Olive's fingers were modified into guns. That was an unforeseen factor in my plan. Nor had I known about the hidden passage. I understand. Kinyuan's observational and perceptive abilities were superhuman. Even within the same space and time, he gathered far more information than I did. And there was something here I wanted to confirm. Excessive expansion of perception can cause brain dysfunction. Kinyuan tapped his temple with his finger. Take note of this, Luca. The Archi's combat method pushes the brain to its limits, utilizing all available resources. Do you know what that means? It can't be used as the standard combat method for the Imperial Guard. I flinched at his words, a chill running down my spine. I realized I'd overlooked something important. Soon, I understood exactly what Kinyuan's words meant. You can't use the Archi's combat method while wearing the Legion. Damn it. I couldn't hold back my frustration. Someday, if I became a member of the Imperial Guard, I would be granted the Legion, a full-body mechanical armor. During critical battles, I would go to the front lines equipped with the Legion. The Archi's combat method would be meaningless for me when I wore the Legion. The Legion, a full-body mechanical armor that concentrated the Empire's cutting-edge technology, couldn't be worn continuously by anyone, as it operates on high-bandwidth signals. It requires the full capacity of the brain's resources. Even with this, additional auxiliary processors need to be layered on just to control the Legion. This holds true, even for elite soldiers who've trained their entire lives. I should have realized this sooner. I felt like my past month had been rendered meaningless. I even began to feel a surge of resentment toward Kinyuan. Trying to steady my breath as it threatened to grow ragged, I took a deep, quiet inhale. For an Imperial Guard who's been granted the Legion, the Archi's combat method is a useless skill. Unless, of course, it's a very unusual situation. Mastering the Archi's combat method took both talent and time. It was an absurdly inefficient fighting method. At best, it was just a slight aid to the diversity of combat method. Ha ha. Kinyuan laughed, his shoulders shaking, as though he found this all too amusing. Seeing him laugh while I frowned only deepened my irritation. If I'd known from the beginning that it was incompatible with the Legion, I wouldn't have tried to learn it. All of this, it's my own foolishness. I couldn't really blame Kinyuan. If I'd been just a bit sharper, I would have realized the true nature of the Archi's combat method sooner. You're truly exceptional. Remarkably so. I thought it would take you at least another couple of months to figure it out. Even with his sincere compliment, I couldn't bring myself to smile. Since Imperial Guards don't wear the Legion at all times, learning the Archi's combat method might still be helpful, but I don't see the need to master it at the cost of increased risk to brain function. I managed to restrain my frustration as I replied, "So, is this the end? Thank you for everything up to now, Instructor Kinyuan. I'll visit from time to time." I saluted as I spoke. "Luca, you're welcome to return anytime if you change your mind." But that wasn't going to happen. I didn't visit Kinyuan for more than 2 weeks. Then, one day, a summons arrived from the Imperial Guard commander, Hemelas. It had been 3 months since I last met with the commander. He seemed to be leading a very demanding schedule. Aile did say there were hints of rebellion within the Empire. That must be why the commander is so busy. Reflecting on this, I found myself standing outside the commander's office. The symbol of the Imperial Guard, a golden sword, was displayed there, elaborate yet not ostentatious. Before I could even touch the controls, the doors slid open to either side. I saluted and looked toward the commander, who was seated inside. "Take a seat and wait for a moment." The commander's pupils constantly shifted in color, signifying that his communication targets were changing by the second. Additionally, he had numerous holograms projected, handling communications and lower security information simultaneously. Is a rebellion truly happening? It was the first time I'd seen the commander of the Imperial Guard so busy. For the past year or two, he'd shown up at cadet training frequently, making me wonder if he simply didn't have much to do. I sat in my chair, waiting for him to finish his work. "Luca, how have you been lately?" The commander paused, then spoke, the hologram surrounding him vanishing all at once. For him to ask about my well-being was unusual. After a brief moment of thought, I opened my mouth to reply. "I've been spending my time in personal training. It's been a while since I last received an assignment. You won't be receiving any field missions for the time being. We believe your abilities are already more than sufficient. You're at a level where you can be an immediate asset without needing more field experience. You've proven as much by fulfilling your role under harsh conditions at the ruins. Whether this was good or fortunate, I wasn't sure. Well, it felt good to be recognized. Being sidelined from missions stung a bit. It meant losing chances to gain more combat experience. I appreciate the recognition, but I'm not sure how I feel about being left out of deployments. Missions will be prioritized for other cadets who need more practical experience. I hope you can understand. A soldier follows the decisions of their superiors." I listened closely, waiting for the commander's next words. It was about time he got to the main point. He hadn't called me here just to chat about this. "I hear you've been in frequent contact with Instructor Kinyuan. The higher-ups were aware of every move a cadet made. They probably even knew about my visits to the black market in the lower district, and my participation in the Colosseum. Cadets like me are the Empire's assets, after all. I was about to reply, but the commander continued speaking before I could. You've been learning the Archi's Victima technique under Instructor Kinyuan, haven't you? The commander even mentioned the exact name of the Archi's combat method. Learning a combat style not listed in the Empire's manuals was not exactly exemplary behavior. Did he call me here to reprimand me for learning the Archi's combat method? It felt slightly uncomfortable, but it wasn't a problem. I didn't plan to continue studying the Archi's combat method anyway. I'm not learning it any further. The commander's eyebrows rose. It seemed he hadn't expected that I'd already quit. There have been several cadets who tried to learn the Archi's combat method under Instructor Kinyuan, but not long after, Kinyuan was the first to give up on teaching them. My eyes must have wavered slightly. The commander didn't miss the subtle hint. If I'm not mistaken, it doesn't seem like Kinyuan was the one to give up this time. You were the one who quit first, weren't you? The Archi's combat method is incompatible with the Legion. I felt it held no value for someone bound to become part of the Guard. You've already figured that much out, have you? Isn't it ironic? Those who lack the aptitude for the Archi's combat method get turned away by Kinyuan, while those who do have the aptitude soon realize they have no reason to continue with it. And so, aside from Kinyuan, there's no one who's truly mastered the Archi's combat method. Anxiety crept up in me. I had the unsettling sense that an order I wouldn't like was coming, and such premonitions rarely missed the mark. Do you want me to continue training in the Archi's combat method? To be precise, I want you to maintain a close relationship with Kinyuan, and to do so, it would be best for you to keep learning the Archi's combat method. This is an order. I opened my eyes wide. It was a form of surveillance. The commander was wary of Kinyuan. Against my will, a flood of speculations raced through my mind, but I couldn't question it. I had to set aside my doubts and follow orders. That was what it meant to be a soldier of the Empire. Above all, I had a feeling that uncovering the truth would put my life at risk. The best way to protect a secret is often to eliminate the one who knows it. Understood. I will continue learning the Archi's combat method. There was only one response I could give. Luca, know that I'm keeping an eye on you. You're the type who's destined to advance. The commander's words left an impression. Destined to advance. I seem to recall hearing something similar from Kinyuan as well.